Chapter 728. A soldier who didn't want to be a general wasn't a good soldier. A tailor who didn't want to be a cook wasn't a good coachman. A bandit who didn't want to be the king of bandits wasn't a good baldy. The bald man really wanted to be a bandit. His grandfather was a bandit, his grandfather's grandfather was a bandit, his grandfather's grandfather's grandfather was a bandit. It was too long ago to trace back that far. All in all, his ancestors had this fine tradition for generations. When it came to his father's generation, he had no choice but to turn over a new leaf because his territory was taken away. With such a glorious history, how could he be willing to be mediocre? That was why he wanted to recreate the glory of his ancestors. But he failed. Once. Twice. Thrice. As the saying goes, nothing can happen more than 3 times. After failing 3 times in a row, and it was a crushing defeat without any suspense, anyone would be disheartened. But he still couldn't accept it. The scholar in front of him had indeed opened a new window for him. However, a thought was just a thought. He needed to have the strength to match it. In the fringe, bandits slaughtered and annexed each other's territories. The winner would naturally obtain a bigger territory and accept everything from the loser. As for the loser, he could only choose to submit or die. He didn't want to choose either of these 2 paths. The bald man waved his hand and said, "Forget it. The fringe isn't that simple. I might lose my life one day." Li Yi shook his head regretfully and said, "All right then. Fong, go ask around and see who is willing to stay here. The first batch of people who stay will be treated like a manager. They will be given a house and a wife after 3 years. They can stay or leave as they please." Fong patted his chest and said, "Don't worry, young master. Along the way, those fellows have been suppressing their evil thoughts. Some of them have mentioned it to me. I'll go and talk to them now." The bald man was stunned and asked, "What do you mean?" Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Don't worry. Our people aren't familiar with this place. It's inconvenient for them to stay here. We need to find a guide who is familiar with this place. I think that mountain tremor tiger is a good choice. Go and ask him if he's willing. Do something." The bald man mumbled. After thinking for a while, he immediately understood what Lin Xing meant by "do something." They were going to do something big. These people were all like monsters. The mountain-shaking tiger was powerful enough and could be considered the largest bandit force in this area, but the other party only sent a dozen people to easily annihilate them. If he really had the help of these people, then whatever tiger of the mountain or soaring dragon of the heavens, they would all be **t. If he was a tiger, he had better lie low. If he was a dragon, he had better coil up. When the time came, he would take over their territory, manpower, and influence. Oh my God, the light that had been extinguished in the bald man's eyes finally reignited. He looked at Li Yi with bright eyes and asked seriously, "Mountain-shaking tiger is a two-faced man. He's not a good guy. I'm also very familiar with this place. What do you think of me? Let me think about it." Li Yi looked at him, thought for a moment, and said, "I don't think mountain-shaking tiger is that kind of person. I have to talk to you about this." The bald man moved a stone and sat opposite him. He shook his head and said, "This mountain-shaking tiger was not a good guy before he became a bandit. He killed someone and was forced by the government, so he escaped here. He first joined a stockade, then poisoned the stockade chief and sat on the throne himself. Then, after a while, Fong came over and said, 'Young master, there are a total of 27 people who are willing to stay.' This number surprised Li Yi quite a bit. The capital was so prosperous and lively, and they had everything they wanted. There was no lack of leisure and entertainment. Yet, there were still so many people willing to stay in such a desolate place. What was wrong with them? What kind of people did Mississippi Lu recruit? When he saw what Mississippi Lou said to those people over there, Lee understood that it was not what kind of people Mississippi Lou recruited, but what kind of leader they recognized. According to the bald macho man, the mountain-shaking tiger was really a bastard who had ulcers on the soles of his feet and pus on the top of his head. No one knew when he would stab someone in the back. Therefore, the job of tour guide and consultant naturally fell on the bald man who was fated with him. When he was thinking about some arrangements in his heart, a cold touch suddenly came to the tip of his nose. Lee reached out and touched it. His fingertips were slightly wet. Looking up at the sky, Fong walked over quickly and said, "Young master, look at the sky. It's going to rain. Let's go to the mountain-shaking tiger's territory to hide from the rain. We'll leave when the rain stops." Lee nodded. Fong walked over, waved his hand and said loudly, "It's raining. Everyone, hurry up and keep up." The rain in the mountains really came without warning. As soon as they walked to the mountain-shaking tiger's place, before they had time to sit down, the heavy rain poured down. Lee stood at the window and looked at it. It seemed that it would not stop for a while. The rain in the mountains comes and goes quickly. The rain should stop in an hour at most. However, it's raining so heavily that it should be difficult to walk later. The bald man was always trying to show his value. At this moment, he stood at the door and showed that he knew the weather in the mountains very well. It turned out that this bald man might not be a good mountain bandit, but he was a good weather forecaster. After more than half an hour, the rain really stopped. Although the rain was not light, it did not last long. The road was only slightly muddy. Fong came over and asked, "Young master, are we leaving?" Lee waved his hand and said, "Let's stay here for the night and leave tomorrow." The muddy road was only one of the reasons. Since he had decided to do something here, of course, he had to arrange the route and plan for the future. After all, he was far away in the capital. Everything here in the future still depended on them. Lee looked at Fong and said, "Call Rui over." There were many things to plan. The first thing was how to deal with mountain-shaking tiger and the others. These vicious bandits should either be eliminated for the sake of the people and put an end to their troubles, or they should be crippled of their martial arts and sent to build roads, bridges, and houses. As for the other small fries, they could not do the same. Of course, the roads still needed to be paved. First, they should be tempered to wear down their character. Then, they should be disorganized and reorganized. Those people could be trained to be the new base. Big fish preys on small fish preys on shrimps. The weak are prey to the strong. This is the law of the fringe. Today's boss might not be tomorrow's boss. Tomorrow's boss might be hacked to death in the evening. If it wasn't for the fact that they had no other choice, not many people would be willing to become bandits. Although they couldn't be completely trusted, they didn't need to be trusted to build a house or to be a lackey who could fight wherever he wanted. Among the small leaders, he could take a white rabbit creamy candy pill to control them. Every 3 months, he would take a hawthorn pill to detoxify the poison. After that, he could let them control their subordinates. At the very least, there was no lack of poison experts among those who roamed the Jianghu. It was not impossible to consider using their real skills. However, this kind of method was a little too lowly. If it really came to that, it would be better to let them mine and build roads. There were some more detailed things that he had to discuss with Mississippi Lou. The sky gradually darkened. The candlelight in the room flickered. A map spread on the table gradually became more and more marks. First, nibble away at the small forces. As for the new recruits, we need to train them. We need a base that is easy to defend and hard to attack. This place definitely won't do. Look here, if we go deeper, it won't be as simple as bandits. Let's avoid them for now. From here, and here, the whispers in the room continued until late at night. Lee put down his pen. Mississippi Lou walked to his bed and crawled into his newly made quilt. Sleep early, Lee nodded habitually. After a moment of daze, he suddenly realized that he was no longer in Phong province. Chapter 729. As a matter of fact, Lee didn't sleep at all last night. His decision to intervene in the Fringe's affairs wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This idea had been in his mind since a year ago, or perhaps even longer. After all, in today's society, there was no such thing as a carefree life. He no longer had one or two people standing behind him. No matter what kind of trouble he might encounter in the future, he had to leave at least 17 or 18 escape routes for himself. He spent the entire night making the arrangements for the Fringe's future as detailed as possible. Although he couldn't say that he covered every single detail, he wouldn't overlook the general direction. He also had to make arrangements for the people who would stay behind in the Fringe one by one. He had to make the arrangements as detailed as possible to avoid future problems. This wasn't an easy task. It was physically and mentally taxing. When the oil lamp on the table gave its last spark and extinguished its flame, Lee raised his head and saw that the sky was almost bright. "You didn't sleep at all last night." Lee turned around and saw Mississippi Lou getting off the bed and walking towards him with a coat draped over her shoulders. "She still has the cheek to ask me such a question." Lee covered his mouth and yawned. A wave of fatigue washed over him. "You're awake." "I'm going to take a nap." He waved his hand, walked over, took off his shoes and coat, and crawled into bed. "It's been a long time since I've smelled a fragrance from my bed. It's a completely different scent from Rui's. More importantly, this bed is still warm." For some reason, the term bed-warming maid suddenly popped up in his mind. Then, after that, he lost consciousness. Mississippi Lou turned around and walked to the table. She was startled when she saw the things on the table. She heard even breathing sounds coming from the bed. She turned around and looked again. She didn't look away for a long time. young master, are you awake?" After an unknown period of time, a voice came from outside the door. She collected her thoughts and put on her clothes. After a simple wash, she opened the door. "We haven't seen each other for a few months, and the son-in-law has become lazy. It's already so late, and he's still not up." Phong stood at the door and muttered softly. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he heard a creaking sound behind him. "Goo." Phong turned around and swallowed his words. "I'm sorry, second miss, I went the wrong way." He quickly walked to the side, and after looking left and right, a puzzled look appeared on his face. "That's right." Mississippi Lou walked out of the door, then turned around and said, "Don't disturb him. Let him sleep a little longer." Phong looked into the room. When he saw a figure lying on the bed, his eyes immediately widened. At this moment, his heart received an unprecedented impact. He needed to think carefully about what had happened during the few months when the son-in-law and second miss were away. Young miss, son-in-law, second miss. His mind was in a mess, even more so than every time he passed by Willow Lane. The weather in the mountains was indeed unpredictable. It had rained heavily yesterday, and the dark clouds in the sky seemed to be pressing down. When Lee woke up, he washed up and walked out. The warm breeze was warm, and the sun was shining brightly above his head. There was not a single cloud in the sky. The bald bandit said that there was a flash flood in a nearby stream, which was a common occurrence in the mountains. Lee did not intend to delay. After 2 hours, he informed them of the strategic plans for the next 2 years and planned to set off today. When he left, he naturally left behind a sum of money. Regardless of whether it was to purchase rations or to recruit soldiers, they would need to spend a lot of money. Lee had never been stingy when it came to investments with great potential. This time around, if it wasn't for the generosity of the Bing region's officials, he would have been a little short on money. When the bald bandit saw those chests, his eyes widened. After living for so long, this was the first time he had seen so much money. He subconsciously thought that they had robbed this along the way, and he no longer had any doubts about something. Robbing caravans was just a low-level bandit. Robbing bandits was the true bandit of bandits. As expected, they had really gone down the wrong path in the past. What happened next depended on them. For now, this was all the help Li Yi could provide them. He did not know if it was because he did not make Fang stay, but Li Yi felt that the way Fang looked at him today was very strange. His gaze was rich with emotions, which was extremely rare. However, no matter how strange it was, he did not intend to leave this fellow here. After all, no one but Fang himself could withstand the power of his wife. The bald bandit pointed to the rushing flood and said, "Follow this river. If everything goes well, we can reach Shu province in 3 to 5 days." Due to the heavy rain yesterday, the trickling stream had now turned into a muddy torrent. It was quite powerful. Fortunately, mountain torrents often broke out here. The river was so wide that it couldn't reach the shore, and the water couldn't reach the mountain path on one side. "Let's go." After Li Yi cleared his throat and gave the order to set off, the creaking of the carriage came from behind. At a bend in the mountain path ahead, the man surnamed Fang's clothes were still wet and stuck to his body, making him feel especially uncomfortable. His shoes and socks were also wet, and there was even water in his boots. His eyes were bloodshot, and the depression and anger in his heart had almost reached the limit. The nearly 100 figures around him were in the same situation. Ever since they entered the mountains, they had already encountered several groups of bandits. They all treated them as caravans. Although they were all weak bandits, they still brought them a lot of trouble and completely messed up their journey. The sudden rain yesterday had caught them unprepared, and they did not even have time to set up camp. Although they had rested for a night, the mountain was wet and their clothes were still wet. In such a state, the atmosphere was extremely oppressive as they walked on the bumpy mountain path. "Damn it, damn it, damn it, Li Yi, don't let me meet you again." As he cursed angrily, the group of people had already reached a bend in the mountain path. The carriage in front of them suddenly stopped. The youth named Fang looked up and saw that 1,000 feet away, the figure in front of them, as well as the creaking sound of the carriage, was very, very close. "Protector, there seems to be a caravan in front." A hint of impatience appeared on the man surnamed Fang's face. Although he did not know which caravan dared to pass through here, since he had encountered them, there was no reason for him to let them go. He waved his hand and was about to speak when a figure suddenly flew out from the carriage. The middle-aged Taoist nun's face was slightly pale, and her eyes were filled with shock and uncertainty as she looked ahead. There really are caravans passing through this place," Li Yi said in astonishment as he looked at the horse carriage and the silhouette of the people not far away from him. However, the surprise on his face quickly disappeared. Looking at the figures in blue and yellow, he dismounted and muttered, "It can't be." It was unknown when the sloppy old man had appeared beside him. After throwing a piece of candy into his mouth, he fiercely chewed and slowly said, "Yes." Old Taoist Yuan appeared on his other side. Looking at the figure in front, he said, "So it's her." Chapter 730. Good will be rewarded, evil will be punished. It's not that there will be no retribution, it's just that the time has not yet come. Good and evil will always be rewarded, the heavenly Tao reincarnates. If you don't believe it, look up, who will the heavens spare? Li Yi had always believed in these two sentences, and he unswervingly followed them by example. He helped the elderly cross the road, picked up money and handed it to the authorities. Although he had not done any of these things, he had occasionally gone to Willow Lane to help 2 weak women carry water and cook. Therefore, he had always thought that his encounter with Taoist nun was a result of God's glaucoma. Now God's glaucoma had been cured. In any case, he was a transmigrator, and transmigrators were rare. Who knows, he might be used as a model by some discerning author in the future, and become the protagonist of a novel. With the protagonist's halo on his head, he would walk to the peak of his life, and in the end, he would rule the world, embrace beauties, and live a shameless life. As a protagonist, how could he be bullied? Li now knew that the process was full of twists and turns, but the result was already set in stone. All the twists and turns were waiting for him. Li looked left and right and said, "Elder Yuan, Su, this time, I'll leave it to you. Taoist priests and Taoist nuns, none of them are good." Su nodded strangely and said, "Leave that damn Taoist nun to me." The middle-aged Taoist priest glanced at him, but did not say anything. Li turned around, pointed to the front, and said, "Those people are not simple, everyone be careful." Along the way, they were already familiar with this kind of thing, and did not even need to explain or say much. The crowd behind them had already started moving. In front, looking at the crowd pressing toward them, as well as the two extremely dangerous figures in front of them, Taoist nun's face finally darkened. "Retreat." As soon as her voice fell, she had already disappeared. That thing, the youth surnamed Fong had already realized something, and his expression changed. He looked ahead, then looked at the rushing torrent below, and waved his hand to the back, gritted his teeth, and jumped down. He was already clear about the strength of those people. This time, he had chosen this path to avoid them, but who would have thought, the man with the surname Fong's actions were like throwing a stone into the surging muddy water, instantly disappearing without a trace. Li looked at the yellow-clothed and blue-clothed people jumping into the mountain torrent like dumplings. He couldn't help but be stunned. After a long time, he sighed and murmured, "They are really cruel to themselves." Su and Taoist Yuan went after the Taoist nun. As for the rest of the people, seeing that the situation was not good, they all jumped into the water and disappeared in an instant. Seeing that they did not hesitate at all, Li strongly suspected that the followers of the holy religion had really learned some secret techniques like the water escape technique. As the second most important person in the cult, he had never heard of something that even the ordinary members of the cult knew. The Taoist nun was so cunning. She actually hid it from him. In the end, there were still some people who did not react in time. Before they could use the water escape technique, their acupuncture points were sealed. There were about a dozen people. Naturally, these people could not jump into the water. The water was vast and mighty, and it was mixed with sand and stones. Even if the top experts jumped in, their lives would be in the hands of the heavens. If they did not know the water escape technique, they could only rely on the protection of the goddess. However, their goddess probably did not have the time to protect them now, because she could not even protect herself. As Li walked over, Fong ran over excitedly and said excitedly, young master, we are rich." He opened a few big boxes in a row. Even Li could not help but be stunned when he saw the contents of the boxes. Gold and silver were the lowest grade here. All kinds of treasures, calligraphy, and paintings were piled up in the boxes like sundries. If they were all exchanged for silver, it would probably be an extremely terrifying number. They are actually so rich. This time, Li was really a little shocked. The Taoist nun's base was in the Qi kingdom. This trip back from the Jing kingdom was actually able to gather so many treasures. Just how rich was their cult's foundation? Damn it, it was really too tempting. Li still felt a little pained when he left the starting capital for the bald bandit and the others. But this time, he did not dare to say that he would earn back tens of times the amount. Li walked over and stopped in front of a man in yellow. He asked, "Speak, what are you doing here?" The man snorted coldly. "You betrayed the goddess. You will not have a good ending." These followers were stubborn. Li had already experienced it. He did not know what method the Taoist nun had used to brainwash them so successfully. Fong picked him up with one hand and said, "Young master, wait for me for a while." Having said that, he walked towards a corner. After a while, he came back and said, "Young master, I've asked him. He said that they were returning to the Qi kingdom this time. In order to avoid bumping into us, they took this path. This was fate. Everything was predestined." Although these treasures could not make up for what the Taoist nun had done to him, they could at least repay what they could. They could barely be considered compensation for the psychological damage. As for the physical body, they could talk about the physical body when there was a chance in the future. Fong hesitated for a moment and said, "Young master, there's one more thing." "What is it?" Li Yi looked at him and asked. Fong pointed at the boxes and said in a low voice, "He said that these treasures were stolen from the King of Shu's treasury. This was the true meaning of fate." Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He looked at Fong in confusion and asked, "What did you say just now?" Fong was stunned. He shook his head and said, "Did I say anything just now?" "No. You really didn't." Li Yi was very pleased. After not seeing each other for a long time, Fong had finally become a little more understanding. Fong pointed at the men in yellow and asked, "Young master, what should we do with these people?" In fact, it was useless to keep these people. In the holy religion, the status and strength could be seen from the clothes they wore. The purple emissaries, blue emissaries, yellow emissaries, and then ordinary believers. The strength of these men in yellow was not high. Otherwise, they would not have been subdued without any time to react. These people were different from the mountain bandits. They were very stubborn and could not be subdued for their own use. It was better to let them invest in basic construction. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Send them to the bald man. They know what to do." Su came back very soon. He did not look very good. The middle-aged Taoist shook his head and said, "If a guru wants to escape, it is very difficult to stop her. Coincidentally, she is very good at lightness skills, so we did not catch up with her." Li Yi shook his head, indicating that he did not care. Although he still felt a little regretful, he also knew that gurus were not that simple. He was mentally prepared and would not be too disappointed. Thinking of something, he looked at the middle-aged Taoist and asked, "Taoist Master Yuan, do you know her?" The middle-aged Taoist nodded and said, "I thought she would disappear without a trace. I did not expect that in just a short 20 years she has grown to such an extent. Taoist Master Yuan, is this Taoist nun related to you?" The slovenly old man glanced at him and asked with a frown, "You are so old and have one foot in the coffin." Could it be? The middle-aged Taoist glanced at the slovenly old man and ignored him. He said slowly, "When I saw her, she was about the same age as Miss Liu. It was during the transition between the old and the new dynasties. Because the Fong family was involved in the factional struggle in the court, they were exterminated. Now that more than 20 years have passed, the hatred in her heart has not disappeared." He looked in a certain direction and sighed, "She is also a pitiful person." Chapter 731. The grudge between the Taoist nun and the old emperor was deep. Li Yi had met them several times along the way. Although he did not know the ins and outs of the whole matter, he knew a little. Now he understood that there was more than just a grudge between them. The hatred of the extermination of the family was as deep as the sea. Although the old emperor had not ascended to the throne at that time, it was not wrong to put the blame on the old Li family. Killing an entire family, and they were not allowed to rebel. Now that he thought about it, it had not been easy for the Taoist nun. Traveling to other countries and enduring humiliation for more than 20 years, not only did his martial arts cultivation reach Songsha realm, he even managed to develop such a huge faction. If this were to be placed in a novel or drama, it would definitely be used as a revenge plot of the protagonist, and there would be no need for any changes at all. His conscience told him that if this had happened to him, he would have taken even more extreme measures. However, understanding was one thing, but he could not forgive what the Taoist nun had done. The one who killed her family was the old emperor's father. Of course, there was no way to take revenge. It was too difficult to take revenge on the old emperor. Logically speaking, the most suitable target for her to kill, torture, and tie up should be the king of Shu. What did it have to do with him? Sympathy was sympathy, but he still had to repay what he owed. Although it was a pity that he did not catch the Taoist nun, he could not force her. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Hurry up and cover these things. Let's go quickly. We have to find a place to stay before it gets dark." Night gradually fell. Somewhere in the open space in the mountains, simple tents had been set up. Lights shone from the tents. Outside the tents, there was a roaring bonfire. Toasts were exchanged in the surroundings, and the deer legs above the fire were dripping with fat, making a sizzling sound. The roars of all kinds of beasts came from the mountains, but it did not affect this small carnival. Even a certain man sitting by the fire was still hesitating in his heart. How should he eat the bear that he had just hunted back? Dozens of miles away, a torrent of sand rolled away. The middle-aged Taoist nun carried a figure away from the riverbank and slowly walked deeper into the mountains. In the endless darkness, the shadows of the trees swayed like ferocious beasts choosing people to devour. There were also subtle sounds coming from it. There's actually someone. It's a Taoist nun. A Taoist nun is also passable. Several figures walked out of the darkness and chased after them. Shu Prefecture, King Shu's mansion. The king of Shu had become haggard in recent days. The servants in the residence could not relax, fearing that they would be scolded or punished by the king of Shu. "Your Highness, there's still no news." The king of Shu slumped on his seat. Someone came in from outside and said respectfully. The king of Shu looked up at him and asked, "Are you sure they are not in the Qi kingdom? We didn't find anything along the way." The king of Shu was slightly excited. Could it be that they met with an accident? The silver and treasures lost in the treasury might not be found this time, but if something happened to Li Yi and the others, such as choking to death while eating, choking to death while drinking water, or being crushed to death by a meteorite while walking, it would be good news for him. It could slightly dispel the depression in his heart and relieve his mood. At the thought of this possibility, even his face became slightly ruddy. It was also at this time that carriages drove into the city gate of Yong County. The guards at the city gate were about to go forward to check, but when they caught a glimpse of the sign shown by one of the carriages, their expressions changed and they immediately gave way respectfully. This was not the first time he had seen such a sign. The first time he saw it, it was because a general in the city had a conflict with those people. Now, when they were on duty every day, they would pass by the grave of that general. After the carriages entered the city gate, at the gate, there were immediately people running wildly toward the yamen. The streets of Yong County looked a little familiar to Li Yi. Not far away, the new Ru family inn had been built, but it had not opened for business yet. Standing at the entrance of the inn, Li Yi looked around. His surroundings had not changed much in the past few months, but his mood and situation were completely different from before and after. They had been traveling for nearly 10 days. Even if they were martial arts masters, they could not help but feel tired. After arriving in Shuzhou, everything was not so urgent. They could have a good sleep and recharge their energy. Tomorrow morning, they would officially set foot on the road home. Not long after he settled down, someone came in to report that the county magistrate of Yong County had arrived. The county magistrate did not come alone. Accompanying him were all the officials in the county government. Li Yi did not see Jiang Zian in the crowd, but he did not care. That brother Jiang should be feeling very bad at this time. All the officials in Yong County came to express their condolences, but they did not see the king of Shu. He had already arrived in Shuzhou. With the friendship between the two of them, why did the king of Shu not even show his face? Although the king of Shu might not be in a very good mood after his treasury was stolen, there was an old saying that a moment of spring night was worth 1,000 taels of gold. 1,000 taels of gold could be spent, but it would come back. Silver could be earned again if it was gone. Money was just a worldly possession. It was not too much to treat the king of Shu to a meal, was it? A stingy person would naturally not be able to achieve great things. The king of Shu would definitely not be able to achieve great things in the future. When he took a comfortable bath and lay on the bed for the first time in a long time, a satisfied expression appeared on his face. In the king of Shu's mansion, the young king of Shu's face was extremely gloomy. "They are back. Your Highness, they have just arrived in Yong County." The king of Shu paced in the hall. After a while, someone came forward to report that the people from the intelligence office wanted to see him. "No, no. Just say that I am not feeling well and will not see anyone." The king of Shu waved his hand impatiently and said, "You can report to I when they have left." Although he wanted to cut someone into 1,000 pieces, he could not make the decision in Shuzhou at this moment. Even if he really met them, he would feel even more depressed. Out of sight, out of mind. He simply did not even want to see the people from the intelligence office. In the county government of Yong County. The county magistrate of Yong County waved his hand and called a yamen runner over. He asked, "Lord Jiang just said that he was not feeling well. Is he feeling better now?" The yamen runner shook his head and said, "Not yet. Lord Jiang has been resting in his room." The county magistrate knocked on the door and walked into a room. He saw Jiang Zian lying on the bed with a towel over his forehead and his face slightly pale. He asked with concern, "Lord Jiang, how are you feeling? Do you need a doctor to come over?" Jiang Zian shook his head with difficulty and said in a low voice, "I am fine. I just reviewed a few cases last night. Maybe I caught a cold at that time. I will be fine after a few days of rest." The county magistrate sighed and said, "Lord Jiang is a conscientious person. He is a role model for us." Jiang Zian said politely, "It is my duty. It is what I should do." If it were not for the fact that he was in a hurry to rush back to the capital, Li Yi would definitely stay in Shuzhou for a few more days to catch up with the king of Shu and get to know him better. But other than the necessary rest, he really did not want to waste any time outside. Early the next morning, he and Mississippi Lu packed lightly and left the city on a few fast horses with Fong, the sloppy old man, and Taoist Yuan by their side. As for the people behind them, Yang Liuqing was in charge, so it was fine to go back slowly. When the people of Yong County began their busy day, somewhere far away from Yong County, Li Yi tightened the reins of his horse and whipped it again. Behind him was a trail of smoke and dust. Chapter 732. Did he really leave? Hearing the servant's report, the king of Shu asked again with uncertainty. The servant immediately replied, "It's certain. I saw them leave the city early in the morning." Hearing this, the king of Shu was slightly relieved. Then he was stunned and a trace of anger flashed across his face. The reason for his relief was that the god of plagues had left. The people of the secret intelligence office would naturally leave Shuzhou, and he would regain his absolute control over Shuzhou. As for the reason for his anger, it was because the first prince was relieved because of the departure of an insignificant county marquis. At this moment, the contradiction and entanglement in his heart were really not worth mentioning to others. After changing his expression for a while, he waved his hand to summon a trusted subordinate and gave him a letter, saying, "Send this letter to the Cui family." The treasury had been robbed clean, and there was no way to make money for the time being. If they did not ask for help, the hundreds of people in the mansion of the king of Shu would have no food to eat. The county magistrate of Yong County had learned that County Marquis Li had left Yong County early in the morning. At noon, the people of the secret intelligence office also withdrew from the county government office. Finally gone, he murmured with a long sigh. All the officials of the Jing kingdom were afraid of the secret intelligence office. In particular, he had nightmares for several days after seeing the general's head fall to the ground. During the days when their people stayed in the county government office, he couldn't even sleep well. After sending away the god of plagues, it was time to celebrate today. Looking up, he saw the lieutenant of the river county coming out of the room with a ruddy face. The county magistrate looked at him and said, "Lord Jiang, you caught a cold. You'd better rest more." Jiang Zian waved his hand and said, "Thank you for your concern. Zian is fine now." Seeing the lieutenant of the river county walking out in high spirits, he didn't look as seriously ill as yesterday. The county magistrate touched his bulging belly and couldn't help sighing. It's good to be young. It was already late June, probably the hottest time of the year. A year ago, because of the unbearable heat in the capital, many people lost their lives. Later on, it became known as the worst summer in decades. This situation, in the summer of this year, had greatly improved. Firstly, it was raining a lot this year, so most of the weather was cool and not too hot. Secondly, even if it was really unbearably hot, they could spend a few copper coins and hide in the brothel for a whole day. The cool breeze from the ice mirror was so comfortable that it could make people moan. Other than the fact that the weather was cooler than usual, for the commoners of the capital, this was a normal summer. The current situation was generally stable. Although there were disagreements with Qi and Zhao, it was limited to some minor skirmishes. Under the deterrence of Tian Fa, a larger-scale war had not broken out yet. As for the affairs of the imperial court, it was not something that ordinary people could worry about. They only heard that the current emperor was ill and the imperial court had not been convened for 2 months. Fortunately, there were 2 prime ministers who were conscientious and conscientious. Everything in the country was running in an orderly manner as usual. Of course, there were also some things that were different from the past. From time to time, there would be new plays in the brothel, which were talked about enthusiastically by the common people. Nowadays, the brothel had become a place for ordinary people to spend their leisure time. More and more people had developed the habit of going there to listen to plays and music after a hard day's work to relax. Moreover, there was the policy that was closely related to them. Women were only allowed to marry after the age of 16. This rule had been written into the law. Not only in the capital, but also in the neighboring counties, it had begun to be implemented. No one would worry about the waste of food if their daughters were raised at home for 3 years. They were eager to have more daughters, because as long as they reached the age of 13, they could be sent to the eldest princess's workshop. A month's salary would be more than enough to feed the whole family. The commoners remembered the princess's kindness, and the officials and nobles did not dare to look down on her. The women's college had been open for more than a few months. Many of the girls and their families who were of the right age were studying there. On the opening day of the women's college, His Majesty and Her Majesty the Empress personally showed up and said some encouraging words, which directly expressed the royal family's attitude. The officials and nobles in the capital also understood that from now on, the girls who graduated from the women's college would be different from those ordinary girls. Compared with the women's college, the Academy of Sciences was a little less famous, because it did not recruit students from the public. Everyone in the Academy of Sciences was personally selected by the dean, Li Xian. This was also the most mysterious place in the 3 academies, which could be seen from the imperial guards who patrolled the area. Of course, the one that shone the brightest was the Mathematics College, which was in the same place as the other 2 colleges. A few months ago, the account investigation made them shine in the capital. For the first time, the officials of the court saw the horror of mathematics. In the following months, they solved countless problems for the court. The ministers of the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of Revenue, and the Ministry of War almost fought over some top students in the Mathematics College. His Royal Highness Prince Jean, who had always been regarded as a naughty child by the officials, was like a dazzling star. In a very short period of time, he rose rapidly. When the dean was not around, he temporarily took over the position of dean and managed the academy in good order. Many times, people would selectively ignore that he was just a child who had just turned 11. The capital seemed to be the capital of the past, and there was no earth-shaking change because of the absence of someone. The playboys were still playboys, but they would no longer be escorted to the palace gate and beaten with a wooden plank. The young princes lived safely in the palace and would not be beaten in front of the civil and military officials. The rumor that the king of Shu was the reincarnation of a real dragon and could lead the Jing kingdom to prosperity and power had long disappeared, and was not as rampant as before. However, no matter whether it was the common people or the nobles, at some point in time, some strange thoughts would arise in the heart. The capital seemed to be too peaceful. Compared to a few months ago, it was so peaceful that people were not used to it. When he stood at the city gate again and saw the two words, capital, Li Yi felt an unprecedented sense of familiarity in his heart. County Marquis Li, follow me back to the palace to report. The old Taoist looked at him and said softly, don't let His Majesty wait too long. Report what? We'll talk about it when we have time. Li Yi waved his hand and shook the reins. He turned around and ran along the familiar path. The sloppy old man glanced at the middle-aged Taoist and quickly followed. Taoist priest Yuan, this. A general of the intelligence division looked at the middle-aged Taoist with a troubled expression. I've already sent someone to the palace to report to His Majesty. If this, the middle-aged Taoist waved his hand and said, report as it is. In a small courtyard, a thin figure sat by a stone table. She held her chin with both hands and murmured, it's been 4 months and 9 days. Son-in-law and second miss had been gone for 4 months and 9 days. To her, this was a very, very long time, so long that she could not imagine it in the past. Fortunately, she received news some time ago that they would be back soon. However, they did not say when they would be back, so she could not even count. She maintained this posture, her head swaying left and right. At a certain moment, her eyes were suddenly covered by someone from behind. A familiar voice came from behind. Guess who I am? The little servant girl seemed to be thinner than before. Her face was not as round as before. He still liked Xiao Huan, who had an oval face and some baby fat. In the following days, he must feed her back. Then he felt a warm feeling on his palm. It was also a little wet. Then he heard the little servant girl's choked voice. Son-in-law, she suddenly turned around and hugged Li Yi tightly. She used all her strength and Li Yi's chest was soon wet. The little servant girl was indeed made of water. Li Yi gently patted her head. When he turned around, a figure walked out of the room. The moment their eyes met, time seemed to freeze for a moment. Li Yi looked at the beautiful woman who was smiling at him and said softly, I'm back. Chapter 733. The closer they got to the capital, the stronger Li Yi's desire to return home became. They changed horses over and over again, almost to the point of traveling day and night. As a result, even the messenger from the secret intelligence office wasn't much faster than them. At this moment, the news of his return to the capital should have just reached the imperial palace. They hadn't seen each other for nearly 5 months, but Rui hadn't changed much. She was just a little pregnant. Li Yi walked over and hugged her gently. Then, he bent over and put his ear on her belly. He seemed to be able to feel the rhythm of another breath of life. He had lived 2 lives and experienced many things, but this was the first time he had experienced such a feeling. Rui reached out and touched his face. She said softly, husband. Both of them seemed to have thousands of words in their hearts, but when they spoke, they were only a few simple words or a form of address. However, the emotions they wanted to express were all contained in them. The young servant girl held the second young mistress's hand and looked at the 2 figures at the door. There was an almost dazed smile on her face, and her entire heart was filled with joy. How nice, she thought to herself. Even if what Li Yi wanted to do the most at this moment was to hold Rui's hand, even if he didn't say anything and just looked at her, the news of his return had already spread. When the matriarch walked in while wiping away her tears, he still had to go over and comfort her. "It's good that you're back, it's good that you're back." The matriarch of the Leaf family had been through a lot and quickly calmed down. She patted his hand and said, "It's good that you're back." Then, as if she had thought of something, she walked over and held Rui's hand. She said, "Now you can be at ease. Let's move to the city in the next few months so that we can take care of each other." Seeing that the matriarch was looking at him with a strange expression after wiping away her tears, Li Yi was startled and quickly realized what she meant. Was she guarding against him? No matter how much of a beast he wasn't that much of a beast. Naturally, he couldn't let Rui leave, but it was necessary for them to move to the city. The main reason was that it was convenient. The capital city was not just noisy. She bought a garden with verdant hills and clear waters so that she could rest in peace and nurture the fetus. It was also convenient for the whole family to live there. After sending off the old madam with great difficulty, Xiaohuan had already run over and asked about what had happened in the past few months. Rui sat at the side and listened. Thus, the story unfolded with a heroine with a sword fighting the evil Taoist nun and rescuing the hero. In a small courtyard at the side, the sloppy old man looked at the old man lying on the rocking chair and said respectfully, "Senior, I've brought him back." The antidote. The old man casually tossed a porcelain bottle over, and the sloppy old man revealed an excited expression. He impatiently opened the bottle and swallowed the pill inside. Grind it into powder and add it to the bathtub. Soak it in the bathtub for 2 hours and the poison will be detoxified. The old man's voice sounded slowly. The joy on the sloppy old man's face froze. After being stunned for a moment, his face instantly turned pale. As his expression changed drastically, he slapped his back and spat out the pill. Seeing the stain on the ground, although his stomach churned, he let out a long sigh of relief in his heart. On the rocking chair, the old man stretched and said, "If it's taken orally, it's also possible. The effect will be better." The sloppy old man's expression froze again. After a moment, he lowered his head to look at the ground. When Changda's stiff and expressionless old face came into Li Yi's sight, he knew that he would have to wait until nightfall to tell Xiaohuan and Rui how he and Luer Xiaojie were on the street, with 2 watermelon knives in their hands, facing dozens of villains, and slaughtered their way in and out. "His Majesty summons you." Although Changda's voice was cold, there was a different expression on his face. "Let's go." The old emperor could not be avoided. Moreover, Li Yi also planned to enter the palace to see his Yongning, Shaning, and the eldest princess. After such a long time, did they miss him? When he walked out of the door, he saw the sloppy old man coming out from another yard and following him. Changda's eyes narrowed and he looked at him a few more times. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Su, do you have something to do?" The sloppy old man nodded and said, "I'm going out to buy something. Let's go together." Li Yi looked at him and said, "What do you want to buy?" "I'll bring it for you when I come back." The sloppy old man looked back and said, "No need. Let's go together." Although Lao Chang was there and nothing would go wrong on the way this time, and Lao Chang could send him back at the worst, it was not a bad thing to have another guru by his side. If Lao Chang wanted to follow him, then let him follow. Along the way, they did not notice any changes in the capital. The sloppy old man got off the car at the gate of the palace. After a few months, Li Yi stepped into the palace gate again. Li Yi looked at Chang in front of him and said, "Chang, we haven't seen each other for a few months. Even if you're not happy to see me again, you don't have to keep a straight face, do you?" Changda looked back at him and said lightly, "We haven't seen each other for a few months. County Marquis Li has made great progress." The foresight of a grandmaster was indeed sharp. To be able to receive such an evaluation from Lao Chang, Li Yi felt that he had the ability to try his luck in the heavenly list. If he were to encounter that white tiger envoy with the surname Fang again, he might not be at a disadvantage. In front of a certain palace, the sound of chattering could be heard. A few figures were chasing each other, laughing and playing. As he passed by, Li Yi saw a small figure running towards him from afar. A smile appeared on his face. He bent down and hugged her, lifting her up high. Then, he touched his nose and asked, "Did you miss me?" Although Yongning did not say anything, she hurriedly took out a handful of candies from her bag, peeled them, and put them in Li Yi's mouth. Li Yi could not help but give her a kiss on her tender little face. At the same time, another figure also rushed over. "Sir!" The proud Lolita, who was over 12 years old, was like a child who would never grow up. After she flew over, she hung on him like an octopus. This posture was really indecent, so Li Yi could only hug Yongning with one hand and Yongning with the other. Fortunately, he was no longer the weak scholar at the beginning. Otherwise, his two arms would not be able to bear such a posture. It was too unscrupulous to hold two princesses and wander around the palace like this. After the initial excitement, the proud Lolita finally reacted and jumped down with a red face. However, she still held on to Li Yi's hand and did not let go. Sir's return meant that she could leave the palace to play again. Without Sir, royal sister was very busy, and she had not left the palace for a long time. Every time she came to the palace to see the old emperor, it would be the Hall of Diligent Government, the Hall of Legislative Affairs, or the Imperial Garden. This time, it was not any of these three places. When they walked to the door of a palace, Changde reminded him in a low voice, "His Majesty has recently caught a cold. Try not to talk for too long." Li Yi still had a lot of things to do, so he did not want to talk for too long. He nodded and Changde opened the door. Li Yi followed him in. Changde walked to the couch inside and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, County Marquis Li has arrived." After not seeing him for several months, Emperor Jing seemed to have aged a lot. His face was sickly pale, and his body exuded the color of twilight. Li Yi looked up and took a step forward. He suppressed the shock in his heart and bowed, "This subject greets your Majesty." Chapter 734. When he saw Emperor Jing lying on the bed, Li Yi once again realized that this wise monarch seemed to be reaching the end of his life. The morning court session had stopped for almost 2 months. For Emperor Jing, who had never stopped this rule for more than 10 years, he would not do this unless he was at the end of his life. "You're back." Emperor Jing leaned on the bed and looked at something in his hand. When he looked at Li Yi, a smile appeared on his face. Li Yi nodded and said, "You're back." Emperor Jing got off the bed and looked up at him. Because of the implementation of the debit and credit law, the court has been arguing endlessly for more than a month. Countless officials of the Qi Kingdom are in a mess because of this matter. It can be said that the whole court is in chaos. The first prince of the Qi Kingdom proposed the law of discussing the silver of punishment. Someone pretended to be the imperial censor and the prince's personal guard. They took away 600,000 taels of silver from Bingzhou in the name of discussing the silver of punishment and disappeared. The people of the Qi Kingdom are very resentful about the silver of punishment. Within a month, about 50,000 people in 3 places have revolted out of anger. Emperor Jing looked at Li Yi and said slowly, "Should I let you stay in the Qi Kingdom for a longer time? It is also a blessing for the Jing Kingdom. If you stay for 8 or 10 years, the Qi Kingdom may perish by itself." Li Yi was stunned and shook his head. "What are you talking about, Your Majesty? I don't understand." He really didn't know about the uprising. Even if there was an uprising, it had nothing to do with him. He couldn't take the blame for everything. The people of the Qi Kingdom revolted because of such a trivial matter. Their hearts were really fragile. "It's good that you are safe." Emperor Jing waved his hand and didn't care. He said, "For the next few days, you should rest at home. Put other things aside for the time being." The other things he mentioned were naturally the affairs of the academy. In fact, there was also the Academy of Sciences. A few months was enough for him to understand that between the two academies, perhaps the latter was more important. No matter which one it was, Li Yi would be able to play an important role. Even if the old emperor didn't mention it, Li Yi would have mentioned it anyway. Rui was pregnant, and he had been away from home for nearly 5 months. He was really not a responsible husband. In the future, he naturally had to make up for it. How could he have the mood to care about other trivial things? No matter what, he had to take 2 years of paternity leave first. As for the academy, Li Han, that little fellow, was managing it pretty well. It was good enough for him to be the Grand Dean. Opportunities had to be left to these young people. While Li Yi was thinking about these things, Jing Di's gaze was always on him. The fact that Li Yi was abducted was indeed far beyond his expectations. However, even though he was abducted, he was still able to stir up such a great storm in the Qi kingdom, stirring up the imperial court, and forcing the people of several lands in the Qi kingdom to rebel. This indirectly eased the friction between the two kingdoms. Because they had to divide their energy to deal with the internal strife in the Qi kingdom, it wasn't that he didn't think about the matter of discussing the silver of guilt. He weighed the pros and cons in his heart, but in the end, it was rejected by Li Yi. At that time, in his heart, there was a slight doubt about the seriousness of this matter. However, after learning the news from the Qi kingdom, the trace of doubt in his heart disappeared completely. Although Li Yi usually didn't reveal his talents, his vision and judgment were rarely wrong. The only thing that had never changed was his lazy personality, which made people feel helpless from the beginning. A strange sound came from the hall, interrupting Jing Di's thoughts. He looked at Li Yi again. Li Yi touched his belly awkwardly and said, "I came out in a hurry just now, so I didn't eat much today. Ask the catering company to prepare something and send it over." Jing Di looked at Changde and ordered, "It just so happens that I am a little hungry." Li Yi didn't have time to refuse. In fact, what he meant was, "Are you done? If you haven't finished, hurry up and say it. If you are done, I will go back to eat." There are still a lot of things waiting to be done, however, he couldn't say this. If he angered the old emperor to death, he couldn't beat Chang. The catering company moved very quickly. It was very likely that it had been prepared a long time ago. Jing Di usually ate light food, and this time was naturally no exception. Li Yi wasn't proud of being able to eat with the emperor often. When Mississippi Liu was recuperating, they had been eating light food. It wasn't easy for them to come back, so they had to eat something, right? Moreover, this wasn't the only reason. There was another reason that he couldn't point out. The old emperor ate with relish alone, and Changda's old face relaxed a little as he looked at him. Li Yi raised his head to look at Changda. He thought of what he had just said, and then looked at the old emperor. He couldn't help but have a strange feeling in his heart. He had to accompany him to eat for the emperor to have an appetite. Was this an abnormal hobby that the old emperor had developed in Ning Wangfu? As he was thinking, Jing Di raised his head to look at him and asked, "Why aren't you eating? Is the food not to your taste?" Li Yi wanted to say something but stopped. He finally asked, "Has your Majesty caught a cold these past 2 days? It's no longer a problem." Jing Di coughed lightly and said, "If it is not to your taste, Shen will order the catering company to make something else." Li Yi had a difficult expression on his face. "Your Majesty knows that this official's wife is pregnant and her body is weak. If this official also catches a cold," Jing Di was very smart. Before Li Yi finished speaking, he understood what he meant. Then the expression on his face became a little dazed. Was he disdaining him? Disdaining the monarch of a country? Disdaining this matter that was regarded as a special honor by countless people? Even the 2 prime ministers in the court did not have the special honor of eating with him. Even if the ministers of the 6 departments received such an honor, they would most likely bathe and fast for 3 days, be deeply grateful, and kneel down to thank the emperor for his grace. But now, he was actually disdained by someone. Jingdi raised his head and saw his innocent face. His face darkened, and he waved his hand and said, "Get out of here immediately." "Get out of here, yes. This official takes his leave." Seeing Li Yi slip out like a rabbit, Changde looked at Jingdi and immediately said, "Your Majesty, please calm down. This old servant will catch the boy and bring him back." Jingdi waved his hand, and a smile appeared on his face again. He said, "Changde, what do you think this boy will be like when he becomes a father?" Changde was stunned, and the scene of him holding the two princesses appeared in his mind. He shook his head and did not answer, but he still felt that the child of County Marquis Li should be very happy. After walking out of a certain palace, Li Yi's face showed a relaxed expression again. His worry was not unreasonable. If he was really infected by the old emperor, where could he go to cry? The world was big, and Rui was the most important. Everything else had to stand aside. But not long after, his relaxed expression gradually disappeared, and a trace of worry appeared between his eyebrows. He did not know how long the old emperor's body could last. According to the current situation, it was really not optimistic. He had no energy to manage too many state affairs. After completely delegating power, what would the situation in the court be like? "I'm afraid I have to make plans early." When passing by a certain place in the palace, Li Yi habitually stopped. You should be faster. Can you afford to make a mistake? And you, what are you looking at? You have nothing to do, right? If you have nothing to do, go and wash the dishes over there. Hurry up, do you not have ears?" The manager of the catering hall was giving a lecture, and a group of people stood in a row in front of him. He enjoyed this feeling very much. In this small place, he was the absolute master. Since a certain day a few months ago, this feeling had become more and more intense. Every time he saw these people standing in front of him with their heads bowed and trembling, he would have an inexplicable sense of satisfaction in his heart. This sense of satisfaction was destroyed when several people in front of him raised their heads and looked behind him. "What are you looking at?" His face darkened. When he was about to give a lecture, he heard footsteps behind him. The manager looked back and saw a familiar figure coming in from outside. His whole body trembled, and something that he had built up with great difficulty in his heart was shattered. "Use the kitchen." After several months, the demonic voice once again rang in his ears. In the morning dew hall. The woman turned and moved, and the sword chi whistled. With the eyesight of ordinary people, they could not even follow her movements. The white-haired old woman stood in the corridor, looked at the figure in front of her, and sighed slowly. A maid came over with a food box in her hand and said, "Nanny Rong, the catering hall sent food here." "Got it. You can leave now." The old woman took the food box, put it on the stone table beside her, and took out the food inside. She raised her head and said, "Princess, eat something first." Mingsu put away her sword, walked over, and said, "Leave it first. I don't have much appetite now." When she walked into the hall, a breeze blew, bringing some of the fragrance of the food. Mingsu stopped, turned her head, and walked straight to the stone table. Nanny Rong watched her pick up the golden fried rice with eggs, which was the princess's favorite food. However, in the past few months, she had never eaten the fried rice with eggs sent by the catering hall. Mingsu picked up the spoon and tasted a little bit. Suddenly, there was a glimmer of light in her beautiful eyes. Then she put down the spoon, raised one hand, and grabbed the arm that attacked her from behind. At the same time, she put down the plate of fried rice with eggs and leaned forward. Bang! Li Yi was pressed against the pillar outside the hall by her. The face that he had not seen for a long time but was familiar to him was so close that he could even see the slight tremble of her eyelashes. The Princess Royal Highness was still as domineering as before. She put one arm on his chest, and the two of them could even feel each other's breath. In this situation, Li Yi did not know if he should close his eyes to cooperate. Perhaps his first kiss today would be taken away by her just like that. Chapter 735. Li Yi's confidence suffered a severe blow when his sneak attack failed and he was knocked out instead. In these 5 months, in terms of training, he did not slack off at all. He slept very well every day. Even if he did not become a grandmaster expert like Ru Yi, unrivaled in the pugilistic world, he could at least be called a hero, right? But even if it was a sneak attack, Princess Royal could force him to the wall while eating, which made him doubt his strength. "You've made a lot of progress." Mingsu said this while eating egg-fried rice, which was a blatant irony. Thinking that she was on par with second Miss Lu, she felt a little better in her heart. Mingsu threw a jar of wine over. Li Yi caught it and threw it back. "You're pregnant, so you can't drink." Mingsu nodded, patted the lid, and drank by herself. When the wine from the palace was sent here, it was served in exquisite utensils. Such a bold and unrestrained scene could only be seen in the morning dew hall. Mingsu asked him about what had happened in the past few months while eating. Li Yi briefly mentioned it and learned something about the women's college and the workshop. He looked at the sky and said, "It's getting late. I'll go back first. See you in a few days." It was a spur-of-the-moment idea just now. He felt that since he had come to the palace, it would be unreasonable if he didn't come to see her. He spent some time at the dining party, so he had to hurry back, or he would miss the meal. Mingsu continued to eat egg-fried rice, waved her hand casually, and didn't look up. Her actions seemed to be careless, but half an hour later, when there was a sword whistling in the back hall, Nanny Rong still found that the sword in her hand was no longer as heavy as before, and it was a little more flexible and light. After having a clear understanding of his own strength, Li Yi planned to let Chang send him back. Not to mention Taoist Nun, even if there was a master as powerful as Princess Royal, the guards on the surface and in the dark, and himself, he was afraid that he would not be able to defeat her. However, when he walked out of the palace gate, Li Yi couldn't help but be startled. The sloppy old man squatted under a big tree not far away, directly facing the palace gate. There were already a lot of candy wrappers on the ground. Li Yi walked over, looked at him and asked in surprise, "Didn't Sue have something to buy? Why are you still here?" The sloppy old man straightened up and said, "I've already bought it. Do you want to go back? It's on the way." If the sloppy old man was passing by, then Chang wouldn't have anything to do with it. If there were really 2 grandmasters who had come together to kidnap him, Li Yi would accept it. Su Tian, Chang stood at the gate of the palace and watched the carriage leave. He thought of what Daoist Yuan had said before, and after spitting out the name, his eyes narrowed. On a certain street in Jingdo, the sloppy old man pointed forward and said, "It seems like this is not the way to go back. That road is blocked. It's faster to go here. Listen to me, you're right." When the carriage reached a certain place, Li Yi waved his hand and jumped out of the carriage. He said, "Sue, wait here for a moment. I'll be right back." As he said this, he had already walked into the alley. Willow Alley was still Willow Alley. People came and went in the brothel next to the alley, but there were not many customers in the tea house in the alley. This was because the cost of the tea house was not low. Unknowingly, most people were blocked outside. At this moment, at a seat near the window of the tea house, a few young people looked out and saw a figure walking into the courtyard inside. At that moment, one of them couldn't help but chuckle. "Ha, another one who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth." After everyone looked over, there were a few whispers among themselves. "I'm afraid he hasn't recognized himself yet. If it was so easy to see the goddess of Luo Shui, why would we be sitting here drinking tea? Wait until he gets the cold shoulder a few times and comes to his senses. I'm afraid there will be another person here drinking tea." The few of them didn't hide the sarcasm and laughter on their faces. They, who had gotten the cold shoulder countless times, could already imagine the look on the servant girl's face when she came out. Li Yi didn't notice the few people in the tea house watching him make a fool of himself. After standing outside for a long time, he raised his hand and knocked on the door. The sound of footsteps came from inside, but the door didn't open. Then, there was a clear and angry voice. "Miss is not here. Don't come again." Li Yi was startled. When did Xiao Chui, this servant girl, become so fierce? He knocked on the door again. The footsteps had already gone far away, but they soon came closer. The courtyard door opened with a creak, and Xiao Chui poked her head out. She said with a bit of anger, "How many times have I told you, don't come here, miss?" She originally had a straight face as if she was lecturing them. Halfway through her sentence, her eyes suddenly widened and her voice became softer. Then, she rubbed her eyes in disbelief. After taking a closer look, she still didn't believe it, so she prepared to rub her eyes again. Li Yi pulled her face. It was very elastic and full of collagen. After not seeing her for a few months, she was slightly fatter than before. It seemed that she had been eating well these days. He walked in by himself and asked, "Is Ruoqing and your miss here?" In the tea house opposite, the few young people who saw this scene all widened their eyes at the same time. He just pinched the servant girl's face. He just walked in like that. What right does he have? Voices of surprise and disbelief rang out. The sarcasm in the few people's hearts immediately turned into jealousy and anger. They had also visited countless times. Not only did they not see the Luo Shui goddess, they didn't even step into the courtyard. What right did this newcomer have to go in and pinch the servant girl's face? Immediately, one of them stood up and angrily asked the few people outside the tea house, "Why didn't you stop him?" Although he was still a little afraid of those people, the anger in his heart took the upper hand at this moment. At the entrance of the tea house, a man who sat there every day drinking tea asked in surprise, "Did I see wrongly?" One of his companions said, "I saw it too. It should be right." As the two of them suppressed the shock in their hearts, they saw the young man walking over and questioning them loudly. He raised his head and glanced at him. "Scram! If you don't scram, I'll break your legs." It was obvious that he had suffered a lot from these people. The young man retracted his head and left dejectedly. Xiao Chui came back to her senses. After closing the door, she immediately ran over and exclaimed in surprise, "Li, you're back." Li nodded and asked, "Where are Miss Ruoqing and your miss?" "Sister Ruoqing and miss left early in the morning. I don't know when they will be back." Xiao Chui looked at him and added, "They really aren't here this time. Li, sit here for a while. I'll go pour you some tea." Seeing Xiao Chui run off quickly, Li did not sit down at the stone table. Instead, he walked towards the back. The door to the art room was unlatched. He pushed the door open and walked in. The furnishings inside were not too different from what he remembered. There were a few unfinished sketches of undergarments on the table. There were also many sketches hanging in the room. It was slightly messy. When he turned around to leave, he turned his head again and picked up a drawing on the table. Underneath it was also an unfinished drawing. It was a drawing of a young man bent over a table, painting. Li stared at it for a long time before putting it back in its original position. Xiao Chui walked in with a cup of tea and said, "Miss and Sister Ruoqing might have gone to a brothel. I don't know where they went and when they will be back. It's fine." Li took the teacup and walked out of the art room. After taking a sip, he placed it on the stone table in the courtyard. His gaze looked around. Not long after, he turned back and smiled at Xiao Chui, saying, "When they come back, remember to tell me. I'll be leaving first." Li Yi walked out of the door, passed through Willow Lane, and got on the carriage. The sloppy old man glanced at him and said, "I just went over to take a look. That road is not blocked." Li Yi put down the curtain and said, "It's been blocked." Chapter 736. In the small courtyard, Xiaohuan bent over, put her ear on Rui's slightly bulging abdomen. After a while she raised her head, puzzled. "Why are you not moving? It's only been a few months, how can it be so easy to hear?" Li Yi pinched her face. By right, there should be movement at this time, but maybe because both Rui and he liked quiet, the little fellow did not move much. He moved his head closer. "Let me hear." That Sundra lowly stood beside Li Yi with her hands behind her back. She leaned forward and looked around curiously, blinking her eyes. Further away, Yongning was sitting on the swing while Duanwu was pushing her gently from behind. Rui looked at them with a smile on her face. This small courtyard, which had been quiet for a long time, finally became lively again. The news of Li Yi's return was not actually known to many people. He only went to the palace once. After returning home, he did not go out. Now it was already the third day. Mainly because it was not easy to come back, he wanted to have a few days of peace, spend more time with Rui. Once the news spread, the family would not be peaceful. Although the experience of these nearly 5 months, although it was more daunting than dangerous, turning misfortunes into blessings and even had some small gains, but after really experiencing it, only then did he know where the dangers lay, and also made him cherish what he had now. The present life was quiet and tranquil, but it was not easy to come by. Peace was indeed not easy to come by, although the news of his return was not widely spread, but there would always be some people who knew through various channels. Li Xian barged in with a black face, looked at him, said angrily, "You have been back for 3 days, and you did not tell me. If not for Emingzi mentioning it today, I still do not know about it." It was Li Yi's decision not to tell him for the time being. This fellow never thought of him when there were good things, but he could not forget troublesome things. If he wanted to live a leisurely life, he must avoid him. His dark face was obviously just an act. Li Xian had always been heartless, and his eyes were only filled with those strange things. The next second, an unconcealable joy appeared on his face, and he said, "Let's go out and have a drink to celebrate. Let's go to the Jade Courtyard, the old place." Fang, on the other hand, nodded his head fiercely, seemingly agreeing with this suggestion. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "I won't be going to the Jade Field Courtyard. Since you're already here, stay for a meal." Li Xian asked, "Do you cook?" Li Yi nodded. In the days to come, Rui's 3 meals a day, he didn't plan on borrowing other people's hands. Li Xian nodded and said, "Then I won't be polite this time." Li Yi thought, "When have you ever been polite?" But he saw Li Xian slightly turn sideways, pointed to a person behind him and said, "Let me introduce, this is Shen Shu." Don't be fooled by his effeminate appearance, he is very capable. You'll know when you come to the Academy of Science in the future. County Marquis Li, the young man behind Li Xian, stepped forward and cupped his hands in salute. Li Yi casually returned the salute. "Brother Shen, you're welcome." Li Yi rarely saw Li Xian being so enthusiastic to someone. It seemed that this Shen Shu should have some ability, so he couldn't help but look at him a few more times. Her skin was indeed soft and tender, and she looked effeminate. He only took a few more glances before shifting his gaze away. "How is the princess's health?" Li Xian waved his hand and said, "She lives in the palace, and it's very good. There are several imperial doctors around her. Even if I want to see her, I have to get the concubine's permission." As he spoke, he suddenly thought of something and looked at Li Yi with a different gaze. "Actually, I have an idea." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "If it's about the Academy of Science, don't tell me first. We won't talk about these things for now." "No." Li Xian shook his head quickly and said, "Qin was pregnant at about the same time as your wife, so she should be giving birth at about the same time. Based on the relationship between our two families, why don't we just marry each other? Before Li Yi agreed, he immediately said, if it's a boy or a girl, let them be sworn brothers and support each other in the future. If it's a boy and a girl, let's marry each other. What do you think? No. Li Yi was resolute. Of course, he wouldn't agree on this matter. It would be fine if his family gave birth to a son. Although Li Xian was unreliable, he did have the looks of a decent man. His wife's beauty was also 1 in 1,000. Based on their genes, the daughter they gave birth to would not be too bad. It would be perfect for his son. But if it was the other way around and the boy from Li Xian's family wanted to harm his daughter, in his dreams. Li Xian's face was full of surprise. Why? Don't worry about the children. An arranged marriage is not a good idea. Li Yi glanced at him and said, for the sake of a marriage, I wonder who was the one who drank himself into a stupor in Qing and Fu. Shen Shu, who was at the side, looked at Li Xian with some surprise. It seemed that he had not expected him to have such a past. An awkward expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He hurriedly said, aren't we doing quite well now? Although he said this, there was not much confidence in his voice. It was clear that those days in the past were still fresh in his mind. Li Yi stood up, dusted his hands, and walked towards the kitchen. What Li Xian had said just now had its merits. It was fine to become sworn brothers, but as for the good of the Qin gene, that would depend on fate. In his previous life, he did not have a deep understanding of how scary an arranged marriage was. But now, he hated it with all his heart. For Li Xian and the heir's consort to have a happy ending, there were some coincidental factors involved. However, what happened to him involved the grudges between 2 generations. Even now, he still couldn't let go of it. That matter had become a dead knot. Li Xian freeloaded this meal without any pressure. During the meal, he talked about some of the problems that the Academy of Sciences was currently facing. Li Yi only gave him pointers where necessary. For Li Xian, the process of exploration and discovery was what gave him a sense of satisfaction. Don't tell anyone that I'm back for the time being. Before Li Xian left, Li Yi reminded him again. Although there were still many things to do, Li Yi did not want to be disturbed by other things at the moment. Li Xian waved his hand to indicate that he understood. Walking out of the courtyard, he habitually put his arm around Shen Shu's shoulder and said with a smile, this guy is like this. When you go back, remember not to tell anyone. Shen Shu frowned. He was still not used to his warmth. He discreetly removed his arm and said in a low voice, got it. Li Xian touched his nose and said, I say, can you be more like a man? You are so effeminate. Which girl will be willing to marry you in the future? None of your business. Shen Shu's voice finally rose a pitch. In the small courtyard, Li Yi could no longer hear these voices outside. He stood behind Rui and gently massaged her shoulders. Rui was still a little unaccustomed to this, but it was not appropriate for her to say it. She changed the topic and said, what Prince Li Xian said just now, are you really not going to consider it? Li Yi shook his head and said, marriage is not a child's play. How can we be so hasty and set a marriage for them so casually? I'm afraid that they will blame us. After a moment of silence, Rui said in a low voice, then, what about us? Li Yi stopped what he was doing. He thought for a moment and said, don't forget, you were the one who snatched me away. You weren't careless at all. Chapter 737. When a woman was pregnant, her emotions would inevitably become more sensitive. Li Yi did not feel any obvious difference from Rui, but that did not mean that he could be as carefree as usual. Usually, when it came to dealing with small emotions, he would still take it seriously. The old emperor had tacitly approved of his paternity leave and did not send any more workers over. Even the academy did not urge him. For Li Yi, not being able to see Chang's face was something to be happy about. Mississippi Lu had always been restless, but these days, she had a rare moment of peace. Perhaps it was because she was stimulated by Taoist nun. She practiced martial arts every day and would drag him to practice from time to time. She said that she wanted to increase her combat experience. The increase in combat experience was not very obvious, but the pain in his butt became more obvious every time. Li Yi felt that she was taking revenge. Apart from being a human sandbag, Li Yi was not busy these days. Most of the time, he cooked, chatted with her, and read some books on prenatal and postnatal care. As for the other things, he left them to Fong to handle. One of them was to buy a house in the city. It was surrounded by beautiful mountains and rivers and was good for the physical and mental health. Although this place was not far from the capital, it was still outside the city. There were no good places to go around. It was inevitable that he would feel depressed if he stayed at home all the time. Li Yi planned to move there as soon as possible. At that time, it would be more convenient for him to do everything. His favorite place should be Hibiscus Garden, Zhujiang Garden, and a few other places with good feng shui. The environment was good, and most importantly, there were no people. However, this was not a good request. A county marquis occupied the royal garden. It would be strange if the civil and military officials did not go crazy. These days, he often saw the sloppy old man at home. Previously, he thought that the sloppy old man had been entrusted by his second granduncle to travel thousands of miles to the Qi kingdom. Now, it seemed that this was not the case. He saw through it but did not say it. With a Grand Master by his side, the safety factor immediately increased. He originally thought that he could use a pile of white rabbit creamy candies to deal with him. Now, he even saved these things. Although there was nothing to do at home, the things that needed to be done were still piling up. For example, the Wang clan's glass business, the eldest princess's ready-made clothing, embroidery, military rations, and even the perfume, soap, and rui nectar that he didn't need to manage. He had too many businesses under his control. Although he didn't have to do everything himself, it was still necessary for him to understand them. Although these things had to be done sooner or later, they weren't that urgent, so Li Yi naturally pushed them off. There were things that needed to be done, and there were naturally people that needed to be seen. As the carriage passed through the capital once again, the sloppy old man finally understood when he saw the complicated expression that flashed across Li Yi's face. However, it was not the road that was blocked. Perhaps it was something else. Zumo, do you still remember when you were a child, you loved to eat the Su Ji's candied plums? At that time, your mother was afraid that you would break your teeth and wouldn't let you eat it, so you secretly saved up money to sneak out. You were almost caught by a trafficker, and the whole family was scared out of their wits. In a small courtyard deep in Willow Lane, a middle-aged man in a blue robe stood there with a smile on his face. He said, "A few days ago, I had been looking for that shop. I ran all over the capital but couldn't find it. Only yesterday did I find out that it was the Su Ji, but it later changed its name." He placed a paper bag on the stone table, opened it, and said, "It's on Xingping Street. It's now called Fuji. When I came just now, I bought some along the way. Try it and see if it tastes the same as before." Xing Zumo looked at the paper bag on the table and the candied fruits inside. A trace of confusion appeared on her face, mixed with some memories from so long ago that she couldn't remember them at all. How long ago was that? 11 years, 12 years, or 13 years? At that time, her mother was very strict with her. Being able to eat Su Ji's candied plums was probably the happiest thing in her life. However, this small wish was actually not very likely to come true. At that time, although her father's official position was not high, he was very strict. Even though the candied plums from the Su Ji worldwide commerce were not worth much, if she really wanted to eat them to her heart's content, second uncle would secretly buy them for her, and she would eat them under the blanket at night. At that time, she and her second uncle were not like this. However, things in this world could never return to yesterday, let alone 13 years ago. Seeing that she was unmoved, the middle-aged man's eyes dimmed slightly, but he concealed it well and said, "Tomorrow is the Singh family's banquet. I have a lot of things to do tomorrow." Singh Shichen was taken aback. He shook his head and said, "It doesn't matter. There will be more opportunities in the future." He looked at the sky and said, "Second uncle still has work to do, so I'll leave first. I'll come see you tomorrow." Only when the middle-aged man turned to leave did Singh Zumo look up. A hint of pain flashed through the depths of her eyes. "It's all in the past." Wan Ruoching walked out of the house and looked at her with some heartache. She placed her hand on her shoulder and said softly. Some long-sealed memories emerged from her mind. Singh Zumo bit her lip, and her face was a little pale. She held Wan Ruoching's hand tightly and nodded. "It's all in the past." Li Yi walked to the door of the small courtyard. He estimated that Ruoching and Singh Zumo should not be there at this time. After hesitating for a moment, he still planned to knock on the door. The courtyard door opened from the inside, and a middle-aged man in a blue robe walked out from inside. Li Yi's movement paused slightly. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Singh Shichen. Why was he here? When Singh Shichen walked out of the courtyard, he probably thought that the young man outside the courtyard door was some kind of crazy bees and butterflies. These kinds of people had appeared frequently recently, and he had encountered them countless times. His gaze did not even linger on the man's face, and he simply brushed past him. However, after taking 2 steps, he seemed to think of something and turned back abruptly. At this time, the young man had already walked into the courtyard, and the courtyard door was closed. Singh Shichen froze in place, and then a trace of surprise appeared on his face. Crazy bees and butterflies. If it was just crazy bees and butterflies, it was impossible to enter this courtyard. That person just now, was it him? Li Yi walked into the courtyard, closed the door, and walked inside. When he was still thinking about why he would meet the right Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue here. If he remembered correctly, the other seemed to belong to the Chui family, and was a firm supporter of the King of Shu. Although there was no direct confrontation with him in the court, this person's status in the King of Shu's faction was not low, and he still had this impression. What puzzled him was that without the permission of the two, it was impossible for outsiders to enter this courtyard, and Singh Shichen was alone. For the time being, he could not figure out these things. Thinking that Xiao Chui should know something, Li Yi passed through the moon door and saw a figure sitting at the stone table in front of him. He said, "Xiao Zumo." Xiao Chui said these 2 words halfway before realizing that the person sitting there was Miss Singh. Her brain was a bit short-circuited, and she suddenly changed her words, sounding like Xiao Zumo. Singh Zumo and Wan Ruoching raised their heads at the same time, and the atmosphere in the courtyard began to become a bit awkward. After Li Yi's footsteps stopped, he showed a smile that he thought was brilliant, and waved his hand, saying, "You are all here, what a coincidence." Chapter 738. When they looked up, the 2 women were startled for a moment. Then, joy quickly appeared on their faces. Xiao Chui had said that he had returned to the capital, but they had missed him a few days ago. In fact, they had not gone out these days. The joy on Singh Zumo's face was quickly concealed. Wan Ruoching quickly took a few steps forward and then paused. Although she was excited, her voice turned into calmness. Xiao Chui said before that she thought you would come over in a few days. Li Yi nodded. Without any courtesy or awkwardness, he nodded and said, "I've been delayed by some matters these few days." Wan Ruoching looked at him and asked with a smile, "How is Madame Li?" Neither of them noticed that Singh Zumo's body trembled slightly when she heard this. She looked at Li Yi and then quickly looked away. She is fine. Li Yi looked back and asked, was the one who went out just now Assistant Minister Xing of the Ministry of Revenue? The security around Willow Alley was not low. However, all of this was on the premise that they did not disturb their daily lives. Those ignorant playboys or those with ulterior motives could not even get close to the gate. However, if they had their permission, no one would stop them. Wan Ruoqing nodded and then turned to look at Xing Zumo. Xing Zumo had already stood up and walked over. Looking at Li Yi, she said softly, I am sorry. Ha! Li Yi was startled, not knowing why she would suddenly say this. I was actually at home that day. Xing Zumo lowered her head. If it wasn't for me, this would not have happened. This matter had actually been buried in her heart for a long time. The two emotions of self-blame and guilt intertwined in her heart every day. It was only at this moment, when she saw that he was safe and sound with her own eyes, that her heart could finally be at ease. Li Yi finally remembered that he had been to Willow Lane that day. At that time, Xiao Zue said that Xing Zumo was not there. When he went back, he met the Taoist nun. At this moment, he smiled and waved his hand, as if he didn't care about this matter at all. He said, this has nothing to do with you. She originally planned it. If it wasn't that day, it could have been the second day, or the third day. Instead of asking why Xing Zumo asked Xiao Cui to lie that day, Li Yi looked at her and asked uncertainly, that Assistant Minister Xing. Xing Zumo whispered, it's my second uncle. Suddenly hearing this news, Li Yi was startled. He looked at her and asked, this. What is going on? He could feel Xing Zumo's emotions at this moment. After saying this, he immediately changed his words. If it's not convenient, it's not inconvenient. Xing Zumo shook her head. It's all in the past. She walked towards the door. I'm about to go to the shop. Let's talk on the way. Li Yi really didn't expect that she actually had such a story. More than a decade ago, the Xing family was not very prominent, but in the capital city, it was also regarded as a rich family. Of course, the Xing family at that time was not the Xing family now. Xing Zumo's father seemed to be a small official in the Ministry of Revenue. Later, because of a mistake in an important matter, he was involved in the struggle in the court and was pushed to the teeth of the storm. As a result, the direct line of the Xing family suffered a heavy blow. The men were punished, beheaded or exiled, and the women were sent to the musical house, while the others were safe. Later, the second branch of the Xing family got in touch with the Cui family, so the Xing family recovered. Xing Shichen was even promoted to the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue. In fact, today's Xing family was more prominent than 10 years ago. As a direct line of the Xing family, Xing Zumo was implicated at a very young age. After several twists and turns, she moved to the musical house, the Jade Courtyard, and then redeemed herself and came to the capital city. She had never mentioned these things before, so it was the first time for Li Yi to know. Li Yi looked at her and asked, are there any family members in the musical house now? Xing Zumo shook her head and said, my mother had committed suicide before they came to confiscate our house. In fact, I am the only one. Li Yi had heard about what happened in the musical house and the brothel, and then associated it with her decisive and almost stubborn character. He could roughly imagine how she grew up step by step from the daughter of an official to become what she was now. How many hardships and suffering she had suffered, even if he had lived 2 lives, he could not understand it at all. Thinking of these things, he inexplicably felt a little sad in his heart. Xing Zumo inadvertently raised her head and happened to catch a certain expression on his face. Li Yi's heart sank. He was worried that with her character, she might regard this as pity, so he hurriedly explained, don't. Seeing his nervous look, Xing Zumo smiled, and a trace of warmth surged in her heart. She asked, what about you? Where have you been these months? Ruoqing, who had not spoken all the way, also turned to look at him. all the way to the west, first to Suzhou, and then stayed in the Qi kingdom for 2 months. Li Yi gave a brief account of his journey over the past few months. As for the dangerous parts, he naturally skipped over them in a single sentence. Even so, the two women heard something different from his words. They clenched their fists in their sleeves, but did not show the slightest emotion on their faces. A few steps behind him, the shock on the face of the sloppy old man had never faded. At this moment, he finally understood why that shortcut was always blocked. Li Yi did not say much on this topic. When passing by a clothing store, he cleverly changed the topic. In terms of clothing, the capital city had undoubtedly set the trend for the Jing kingdom and even the surrounding countries. The dazzling array of clothing had caused the eyes of the women to be dazzled. As for undergarments, most of the women had already accepted them. Although there were still some conservative women who still resisted, they could no longer affect the vigorous reform of undergarments. The brothel had not changed much. In fact, the operating model had matured, and the number of brothels in the capital had long reached saturation. In these months, in addition to expanding to more distant states and counties, they also took root in their respective places, and gradually became a daily thing for the people. Every midnight, Wan Ruoqing would vaguely remember that more than a year ago, when the brothel was about to close and everyone was worried about their livelihood, he broke into everyone's sight with a disdainful attitude. At first, he just wanted to live and survive in such a world. Later, he didn't have to worry about living, and he wanted to let the performers of Qing and Mansion live a better life. Later, it became what it was today. The magnificent picture that he had imagined at the beginning would probably be realized in the near future. Li Yi estimated the time and said, "It's getting late. Let's find a place to eat first. Why don't we go back and cook?" Wan Ruoqing suggested. Li Yi pointed to the restaurant in front and said, "In a while, we'll go to the shops and brothel in front to take a look. Let's make do here first." Wan Ruoqing nodded, and Xing Zumo naturally had no objections. Ever since all kinds of new plays began to rise in the capital, whether it was the common people or the powerful officials, many people had developed the habit of listening to plays. Many restaurants in the capital had also undergone some changes. After entering the restaurant, the first thing they faced was a stage that was half the height of a person. On the stage, there were performers specially hired by the restaurant to perform for the guests to enjoy. In the lobby on the first floor, facing the stage, the tables were arranged in the shape of stars. The position on the second floor was better, and one could see the whole scene from a high place. Of course, the corresponding price was more expensive. When Li Yi and the two women walked into the restaurant, it should be mealtime, but there weren't many customers eating. From the outside, this should be a high-end restaurant. Ordinary people probably couldn't afford it, so it was normal for such a situation to occur. Soon, a waiter came to greet them. At this time, somewhere on the second floor, wine glasses were clinked, but they were not taken back. Seeing this, someone asked curiously, "Young Master Qin, what's wrong?" Chapter 739. The table of banquets upstairs had always affected the heart of this restaurant's shopkeeper. To be able to open a restaurant here with a high standard meant that there must be some sort of backer behind them. At the very least, that backer could help them avoid most of the troubles they encountered on a daily basis. However, in front of certain people, there would come a time when these people would not be enough. The table upstairs belonged to this category. These rich young masters of the capital might not have much ability themselves, but their family backgrounds were often dukes or third-rank officials of the imperial court. They could not be provoked. Fortunately, although there were a few tables upstairs, they were quite far away from each other, so they were safe. The shopkeeper withdrew his gaze from them and looked at a group of people walking through the door. One of them was a young man who looked very unfamiliar, but he was quite handsome. Beside him were two women who were extremely outstanding in appearance. However, the sloppy-looking old man who was following behind the three of them ruined the atmosphere, causing the four of them to look a little strange. He called for a waiter to go over and wait for him. He no longer paid attention to them and focused on moving the abacus in his hand. Speaking of which, this thing made by the academy was really useful. Using this thing called abacus to calculate accounts was much faster and more convenient than before. Young Master Chin, what's wrong? At a table on the second floor, the young man carefully asked again. Nothing. Chin finally withdrew his hand and drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. His expression was calm as if nothing had happened. The young man turned his head and looked down. His gaze swept past a certain place and he was slightly startled. Then, he withdrew his gaze and thought of a certain rumor about this young Duke Chin. His heart immediately understood. He looked down again, and his heart suddenly became lively. Young Master Chin, I'll take my leave for a moment. After another round of toasting, the young man stood up and said apologetically. Then, he turned and walked down the stairs. Chin Yu's gaze moved slightly. He glanced down but did not stop him. Wei Liangjun was the son of a newly appointed assistant minister in the Ministry of Rites. Although he was not directly under the Qin family, he had a deep relationship with the Qin family. Assistant Minister Wei had just been appointed, but in a short period of time, he had made many achievements. His reputation in the court was quite good, and he was a figure that the Qin family was pushing forward. Across from Qin Yu, Tsing Zijin glanced downwards. His face darkened and his facial expression twitched. That man and woman had left an indelible impression in his heart. However, hatred was just hatred. It didn't stop him from thinking that Wei Liangjun, who thought he was smart, was a complete idiot. In the past 5 months, a storm had been brewing in the capital. Some officials had been banished from the capital, but naturally, there were also some officials who had emerged and entered the center of power. The momentary glory made some idiots feel that they could do whatever they wanted in this place. However, he didn't care about how handsome Wei Liang was. Although he didn't want to see that person, he couldn't help but look down. Did that person finally come back? Qin Yu's expression was calm. He pretended to be courteous to the young masters around him who wanted to climb up to the Qin family. As he raised his head to drink, a trace of darkness emerged in the depths of his eyes. Li Yi was ordering dishes. Ordering dishes was actually a science. There were many people ordering how many dishes, how hot or cold, how much soup or dry. All of these were things that had to be paid attention to. In the future, there were even special training for this. But today, everyone here was on the same side, so there was no need to worry about this. Xiao Chui was a qualified intelligence agent. She had unintentionally revealed to him what dishes Xing Zumo and Wan Ruoqing liked to eat. As for the sloppy old man, it was enough for him as long as he had candy to eat. When he ordered the 7th dish, Wan Ruoqing said, "This is enough. There are only a few of us, so we can't eat so much." Li Yi ordered another dish and soup, and then he waved the waiter away. He didn't have to worry about wasting food. Since his martial arts had improved by leaps and bounds, his appetite had increased greatly. A mere 8 dishes and a soup was simply a piece of cake. Across from him, Miss Tseng seemed to have a lot on her mind. She didn't say a word, and occasionally she would be absent-minded. Li Yi guessed that it should have something to do with Assistant Minister Xing of the Ministry of Revenue. The fall of the Xing family 10 years ago seemed to be inextricably linked to him, so it was no wonder that Xing Zumo's mood was affected. He had heard Xiao Chui mention before that she would never come to the capital in this life because of this reason. Li Yi was considering whether to tell those people that if Xing dared to run around in the future and spoil their mood, he would break his legs so that he could go to court with crutches in the future. Wan Ruoqing didn't speak much of the truth, but as long as it was about the brothel or the shop, she would become talkative. Li Yi was not a qualified boss. These things were actually taken care of by her. To be able to manage such a big business in an orderly manner, so that he did not have to worry about the future, for a woman, it was really not easy. Such a woman should be very good at running a household. Just when Li Yi's mind was somewhat anchored, he suddenly heard a voice in his ear. "Ladies, are you interested in going up for a drink?" Of course, this sentence was not directed at him. When Li Yi looked over, he saw a strange man coming from behind, holding a wine glass in his hand. At this time, he was looking at Wan Ruoqing and speaking. There was always no lack of lascivious men around beautiful women. This kind of situation was very common in this era, not only in this era, but also in the future. Wan Ruoqing was originally talking to Li Yi with a smile on her face. She looked back and calmed down. She shook her head and said, "Sorry, we don't know you." "It doesn't matter. Don't you know me now?" The smile on the young man's face was even wider. He said with a smile, "I am Wei Junliang, and my father is the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights." From the moment he walked over to the moment he said these words, he had not looked at Li Yi once. There was no need at all. After all, there were many spoiled brats in the capital, and there were many that he could not afford to offend. But before this, he had already done his homework. He was already familiar with those people's identities and appearances, but this young man in front of him was not included. Moreover, if he really was someone of status, how could he not have two decent guards by his side? As for the old man who looked like he was about to enter his coffin, he automatically ignored him. Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. Li Yi thought about it and asked, "Isn't the Assistant Minister Chen Bo?" Xing Zumo glanced at him and said in a small voice, "A few months ago, the original Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights was removed from his position and imprisoned. The current Assistant Minister's surname is Wei." Li Yi shook his head and said, "The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, a fourth-rank official. How can he be changed so easily? It's really not easy to be an official nowadays." Xing Zumo looked at him in surprise. The reason the original Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights was investigated was because of the account investigation a few months ago, and that matter. Wan Ruoqing's expression changed slightly when she heard the words Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. She glanced at Li Yi and wondered if this matter would affect him in any way. Then, she looked at the young man and said, "Apologies, my friend is here." "Are you talking about this young lady?" The smile on Wei Junliang's face was still there. He said, "No problem, this young lady can come with us, apologies." Wan Ruoqing's tone was calm. Wei Junliang's expression darkened. He said coldly, "This is not giving me face." Chapter 740. For Wei Junliang, what he cared about right now was not his face but the face of the person upstairs. He was full of confidence, but his meaning was already very clear. Just now, Duke Qin had glanced down a few times. It was clear that he had thoughts about these two beautiful women. Of course, Wei Junliang himself also had thoughts about them, but in front of Duke Qin, he could only give way. Only by satisfying Duke Qin could the Wei family advance further. This was not only his intention, but also the intention of his father, the assistant minister. Although he hadn't been in Jingdo for long, during this time, as long as he announced his father's name, any woman would throw themselves at him. Even in Jingdo, an assistant minister was considered a high-ranking official in court. If he went back with his tail between his legs, not only would he lose face, but he would also be laughed at by the people above him. He would probably also leave a bad impression with Duke Qin. Wei Junliang's expression completely darkened. In a cold voice, he said, "Miss, you won't give me face like this, will you?" Wan Ruoqing stood up and quietly said, "Sir, please go back. B*TCH, you refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit." At this moment, Wei Junliang could no longer suppress the humiliation and anger in his heart. He raised the wine cup in his hand and splashed it toward her face. Wan Ruoqing's expression changed. As she retreated, a white hand appeared in front of her eyes and blocked all the wine. As she retreated, she accidentally bumped into a chair and lost her balance. At this moment, another arm seized the opportunity to wrap around her slender waist. Time seemed to return to 2 years ago. That night in Ningguang Manor, he seemed to have appeared in such a manner. The pain from her calf seemed to disappear into thin air. When Li Yi turned around and asked her, "Are you all right?" She shook her head, and a faint blush rose to her face. To the side, Xing Zumo raised her head and glanced at him. Her gaze quickly moved away. Wei Junliang narrowed his eyes and looked at the young man who had appeared in front of him. He said in a cold tone, "A hero saving the damsel in distress." Although he had blocked the wine, Li Yi noticed that Wan Ruoqing's clothes were still stained with a few drops of wine. He shook his hand to get rid of some of the wine and walked over. He wiped the back of his hand on the luxurious clothes of the son of the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites. He said, "This girl's clothes are dirty. You have to pay for it. I am honest with you. 10,000 taels of silver. Remember to send it over before tomorrow. You should be able to easily find out where they live. Remember, 10,000 taels, not a penny less." Wei Junliang was stunned by his action. By the time he reacted, there were already a few handprints on his clothes. Although this piece of clothing was expensive, it was not the most important thing at the moment. How dare he talk to me like that? That woman's clothes, compensation of 10,000 taels. He really dared to say it. The people above should have seen what happened below. At this moment, Wei Junliang had no time to think about why the young man in front of him had the confidence to say these things to him. Instead, he calmed down and said lightly, "I want his hand." The two strong men who had been standing behind him heard this and walked up expressionlessly. "I want his hand." This sentence was somewhat familiar. Li Yi felt like he had heard it somewhere, and it shouldn't be too long ago. Then he remembered where he had heard it. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. These young people always wanted someone's hand. Although it was cool to say such things, if they couldn't do it, they would be suspected of being too pretentious. Doing things in a low-key manner, being a low-key person, there weren't many young people like him nowadays. In fact, when Wei Junliang came down, the shopkeeper of the restaurant had been watching from the side. He knew that the person in front of him was the son of the new assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites. He had just moved to the capital and was in the limelight. Even the people behind him couldn't afford to offend him. This kind of battle was something he really didn't want to participate in, but if there really was a big mess in this restaurant, then this would be the end of his career as a shopkeeper. However, as soon as he stepped forward, before he could even show a flattering smile, he was glared at by Wei Junliang coldly. He shivered and immediately retreated. Seeing the two people walk towards Li Yi, Wan Ruoqing and Xing Zumo's expressions both changed. Although they knew that he seemed to know some martial arts, the two people in front of them seemed a bit imposing. The sloppy old man sat firmly in his seat. The big white rabbit was gone. He habitually tossed a broad bean into his mouth and said, "Don't panic, don't panic. It doesn't matter how many of these people come. You have to believe in your man." At this moment, he sighed in his heart and even felt a tinge of sourness. No matter where this brat was, there was no lack of beautiful women by his side, whether it was at home or outside, or even in the kingdom of Qi. That girl surnamed Lin must have some special feelings for him. To think that when he was young, Su Tian could be considered to be elegant and elegant, attracting the admiration of countless women. How could it be that at that time, he was only focused on martial arts? As he thought of this, a look of reminiscence appeared on his face. Being interrupted like this, the two women blushed at the same time. Xing Zumo turned back to glare at him and secretly spat. But at this moment, the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground could be heard. Looking back at the scene in front of them, both Wan Ruoqing and Sing Zumo were a bit stunned. The two men fell to the ground, each holding an arm. Bean-sized beads of sweat rolled down their foreheads. Wei Junliang's mouth was wide open and the shopkeeper's face was full of shock. Several of the diners who were paying attention to this table dropped their chopsticks to the ground. No matter how one looked at it, it was hard to tell that the two strong men did not even have the slightest ability to fight back in front of this frail-looking young man. When Li Yi walked over to Wei Junliang, the latter's expression had already changed a bit, but it was not obvious. He only said coldly, "No matter who you are, you can't bear the price for touching me." Li Yi smiled and reached out to tug at the corner of his mouth. He shook his head and said, "Young man, don't keep saying things like face and price all the time. That's not good." The scene before them was really quite dramatic. The two were about the same age. In fact, Wei Junliang looked a bit older. So when the young man put on the appearance of an elder and said those words to Wei Junliang as if he was reprimanding a junior, the scene was a bit out of control. At that moment, someone in the corner laughed. Even though the scene before them was beyond their expectations and they couldn't help but laugh, it also showed that this young man had a lot of scruples about the title of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. After all, Wei Junliang was the son of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. If he really treated him like how he treated the two guards and crippled one of his arms, things would be irreversible. Wei Junliang was naturally furious that his face was pulled in front of everyone. He wanted to say, "Who the f***ck are you?" but he didn't dare to. If he really angered this madman, it wouldn't be worth it if he got hurt. But after this, he had to vent his anger. This madman in front of him and the two women, they could not escape from his hands. This guy called Wei Junliang was very stubborn. When he pulled him, it was far from the feeling of Xiao Huan and Mississippi Liu. Li Yi let go of his hand and patted his shoulder. He said, "Remember to pay for the clothes. Don't forget." Then he said to the shopkeeper, "Please hurry the kitchen, the food is too slow." The shopkeeper was stunned on the spot. How could he still think of eating at a time like this? Did he really think that they could eat this meal in peace? This person doesn't treat the assistant minister as an assistant minister. After saying that, Li Yi raised his head and looked at a certain place upstairs. He sighed softly with a complicated expression on his face. It was really a small world. When he looked away, a sharp glint appeared in his eyes. Some things, if done too much, will become meaningless. Chapter 741. Li Yi had not been idle at home for the past few days after his return. He cared very little about the matters of the court, such as the newly appointed Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights or the changes in other positions in the court. Compared to other matters, they seemed somewhat insignificant. The old emperor's health was deteriorating day by day, and the morning court had been stagnant for a long time. Other than a few major matters, most of the matters in the court were decided by the Minister of State, with the left and right prime ministers as the leaders. This system had been in place since the previous dynasty. The emperor could not personally govern in the short term, so it would not have too much of an impact on the running of the country. The matters of the court were only concerned with the general structure of the situation. Everything else was related to personal matters. Many things had happened in the capital in the past 5 months. Although the information was categorized and organized in an orderly manner, there was still a lot of information, so he only picked out the important ones. It included the two women being ambushed in the middle of the night and narrowly escaping. The death of Li Jianren, the son of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works, was a major case that shook the entire capital, and there was still no conclusion. He still felt some lingering fear when he thought of this matter. If there was anything, it would be directed at him. He hated these people who schemed in the dark. If the so-called foppish young masters of the capital really lost their heads for a moment, they could mobilize a lot of power in a short period of time. It was fine if it happened once or twice, but not more than 3 times. How many times had this happened? Anyone who was kidnapped thousands of miles away when his wife was pregnant and could only return after a few months would feel a pent-up anger. This aura would not dissipate with time. These few peaceful days did not disperse the anger in his heart. Instead, he could not suppress his impulses. Li Yi raised his head and glanced at the sky, then walked over. Ruoqing pulled his arm and shook her head slightly. She whispered, "Don't be impulsive. I saw an acquaintance, so I went up to catch up. The dishes are here. Eat first, don't wait for me." Li Yi smiled and turned to pat her hand. He said, "I just want to tell them that I'm back." Li Yi looked at the slovenly old man and nodded slightly. He turned and walked up the stairs. "Ha, I didn't expect that even the Vice Minister Gongzi would be ignored by others. Our young Master Wei is going to lose face this time. There are crouching tigers and hidden dragons in the capital. How long has it been since he arrived? It's good to take him down a peg." Upstairs, even those who were at the same table as Wei Junliang just now were not necessarily of the same mind as him. Although they all needed to curry favor with young Duke Qin, they were also secretly competing with each other. Seeing Wei Junliang's setback, they naturally couldn't help but tease him a little. However, as soon as they finished speaking, they noticed that Xing Zijian's expression had changed. As for young Duke Qin, his hand that was holding the wine cup stopped in mid-air, his expression slightly unnatural. The sound of footsteps could be heard as they went up the stairs one after another. The footsteps were short but powerful. In this quiet restaurant, they were exceptionally clear. They quickly turned their heads and saw the young man who had been downstairs a moment ago walking up the stairs. What is he doing? The people downstairs who saw this scene all revealed expressions of extreme shock on their faces. The person sitting upstairs was an even more hedonistic hedonist than Wei Junliang. The shopkeeper raised his head to take a look. He seemed to have thought of something and suddenly felt a little dizzy. It can't be. 5 months was not a long time, but it was not a short time either. From when Wei Junliang came downstairs until now, some of the people present seemed to have remembered some people or things that had almost been forgotten. Their faces were stunned and their hearts trembled. It can't be. They muttered to themselves in their hearts. At this moment, Wei Junliang had also come back to his senses. Seeing that the person had already walked up the stairs, he quickly followed and shouted, "What are you doing? Stop!" Under the astonished gazes of the restaurant customers, the contemplative gazes of the hedonists at the table, and the sound of Wei Junliang's hurried footsteps upstairs, Li Yi walked to the side of the table and to Qin Yu's side. "Is there a point?" He looked at Qin Yu with a calm expression, like an ancient well without ripples. Hearing this voice again after so many months, Xing Zijian had to admit that his heart uncontrollably tightened and his palms began to sweat slightly. Those unerasable memories and the continuing pain in a certain part of his body caused him to lower his head, not daring to meet the gaze of the person in front of him. Some of the other young people at the table seemed to have remembered something. Their faces paled and they all lowered their heads. When the others saw that this person actually spoke to young Duke Qin in this manner, they were mostly astonished but even more vigilant. They were not fools and naturally understood that at this time, it was not the time for them to interrupt. "What do you mean?" Qin Yu raised his wine cup, his expression indifferent as he gently took a sip. "I said." Li Yi's voice paused, "Is there a point?" When he said the last sentence, his voice was slightly raised. Slap. The slap was loud and clear, followed by the sound of porcelain breaking. The people at the table saw the young man slap young Duke Qin's face. The wine cup in young Duke Qin's hand flew out of his hand and a swollen handprint quickly appeared on his face. It was hard to describe what they were feeling at this moment. Madman, he really is a madman. Does he even know what he's doing? The moment the slap sounded, Xing Zijian's body trembled slightly. How many times? How many times? The king of Shu, royal prince Duanyang, young Duke Qin, if he was not wrong, this should be the third slap he had given to Qin Yu's face. Wei Junliang had already run up the stairs, wanting to go over and stop that madman. Then, his footsteps stopped. To be exact, one of his feet had already been raised, but he did not know how to take a step forward. He maintained this posture with his mouth wide open and his expression dull. He was not the only one who was stunned. The customers on the second and first floor, as well as the restaurant manager, were also stunned. Everyone thought that when this young man faced the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites, he chose to compromise and did not dare to do anything too extreme to Wei Junliang. However, now that he had slapped young Duke Qin's face, was he telling them that the son of a mere assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites was not qualified enough? The slovenly elder ate a broad bean and looked up in astonishment. He had to admit that this was the first time he saw this side of this boy. Wan Ruoqing and Xing Zumo's expressions changed at the same time. They stood up and quickly walked upstairs. One side of Qin Yu's face was already swollen and looked somewhat comical. He stood up and met Li Yi's gaze. His eyes were calm as he said, "This matter has nothing to do with me. The Qin family will not let this go." Young Duke Qin's words, without a doubt, were like throwing another boulder into the already turbulent lake. This time, it set off a raging wave. What did he mean by "this matter has nothing to do with me"? Regardless of whether or not it had anything to do with him, with his status, shouldn't he pay back 10 times, 100 times more, and even make the other party beg for death? With a swollen face, what was the meaning of such a serious explanation? Was this still the young Duke Qin who was lawless, robbed women, and took liberties with women? He had been slapped in public and still had to give such a serious explanation. This was simply the role model for the capital's playboys. When the top 10 playboys of the capital were selected next year, he would also have a chance to be nominated. On the other hand, wasn't it a bit too much for the young man in front of him to bully an honest playboy? Of course, that was what it looked like on the surface. However, at this moment, everyone knew very well that this unfamiliar young man was someone that even young Duke Qin could not afford to offend. There were also some people who, after carefully rummaging through their memories, finally thought of something. Then, they understood that after today, the capital would most likely become lively again. "It wasn't you." Li Yi was startled and then said somewhat apologetically, "Then I'm sorry, I hit the wrong person." Having said that, he turned his head and looked at Wei Junliang. "Then tell me, who was it?" Being stared at by that cold gaze, Wei Junliang suddenly felt his legs go weak and he knelt to the ground with a thud. Chapter 742. Arrogant, he was simply too arrogant. Among the younger generation of the capital, there wasn't a third person who dared to slap Duke Qin in front of everyone. The reason why it was the third was because there was one person who wasn't in the capital. However, there was only one person who could say, "Sorry, I got the wrong number," in such a nonchalant manner after the slap, and let the matter pass so easily. If Wei Junliang still didn't know that this unfamiliar young man in front of him was someone he couldn't afford to offend, including Duke Qin, then he would have lived the first half of his life in vain. However, while he understood, there were others who didn't. Arrogant, too arrogant. A 14 or 15-year-old youth slammed the table and stood up. He ordered the group of guards behind him, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and bring him to the authorities." Immediately, 2 guards walked over from behind and looked around. When they saw that the guards of the other young masters hadn't made a move, they couldn't help but freeze on the spot and didn't dare to step forward. Wei Junliang's 2 guards were still lying on the floor. They didn't think they were stronger than those 2. If they insisted on putting on a strong front, they might end up like them. "Wang Yu." Someone beside him reminded him in a low voice. Just by looking at Duke Qin's reaction, they knew that today's matter was beyond their control. How could an unrelated person from a branch of the Wang family act like a big shot at this time? Wang Yu. Li Yi raised his brows and asked, which Wang family? The youth had a smug look on his face as he said loudly, Luochuan Wang family. Do you dare to offend the Luochuan Wang family? The Qin family only relied on Prime Minister Qin. Without Prime Minister Qin, the Luochuan Wang family, which had a deep foundation, would far surpass the Qin family in terms of family wealth and influence. As a super family that could stand up to the Cui family, there weren't many in the entire Jing kingdom. Of course, Wang Yu was only a junior from the branch of the Luochuan Wang family. His status in the Wang family couldn't be compared to the direct descendants like Wang Yong and Wang Dan. However, this didn't stop him from using the Wang family's name to scare outsiders. Even in the capital city where heroes gathered, the words Wang clan of Luochuan could indeed shock a large group of people. Wang clan. Li Yi glanced at him and said, go ask Wang Yong and see if he dares to speak like this. You. Wang Yu's face turned red. As a young man, he was unwilling to admit defeat. He pointed at Li Yi and shouted, you'd better remember what you just said. For the time being, the group of playboys who didn't know the background of the person in front of them were all startled when they heard this. From his words, it seems that he doesn't even care about the Luochuan Wang clan. Qin Yu glanced at him, turned around, and walked outside without a word. At this moment, countless people widened their eyes. Leaving just like that? Did the dignified young Duke Qin suffer that slap just now for nothing? Li Yi stretched out a hand and blocked Qin Yu's path. The corner of Qin Yu's mouth twitched. He gritted his teeth and said, don't go too far. You think it's not you just because you say it's not you. Li Yi glanced at him. If the Qin clan wants an explanation, tell them to come find me in person. Since he couldn't settle down anymore, he might as well tell some people directly that he was back. Although he had left the capital for a long time, he wouldn't be bullied by the son of a mere assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. Xing Zumo and Wan Ruoqing came up from downstairs. Xing Zumo tugged on his sleeve. Li Yi turned around with a smile and said, it's fine now. Let's go down and eat. Xing Zijian's expression changed. He finally gritted his teeth and walked out of the crowd. He said in a low voice, Zumo, slap. Xing Zijian's eyes widened. He covered one side of his face and looked at Li Yi in disbelief. Li Yi looked at him and said coldly, you think you can call me Zumo? Xing Zumo tugged on his sleeve again and said in a low voice, he's the son of Assistant Minister Zhang. So what if he was the son of Assistant Minister Zhang? Could the son of Assistant Minister Zhang do whatever he wanted? The son of Assistant Minister Zhang, the son of Assistant Minister Zhang should be Xing Zumo's cousin. They didn't know each other. Li Yi waved his hand apologetically and said, sorry, I hit the wrong person again. Countless people present were petrified upon hearing this. Now, the price for beating up these playboys in the capital was so low. Was that all they needed to say was an apology? A flurry of footsteps came from downstairs. The officials were always one step late. Earlier, when the situation was getting out of control, the owner of the restaurant had already sent a waiter to report to the authorities. He couldn't afford to offend anyone here. Although he couldn't afford to offend the magistrate of the capital, he didn't know the magistrate of the capital, so he'd better leave this headache to him. In fact, when County Magistrate Liu heard the news, he had already cursed all the female relatives of these playboys. Damn it, had it been easy for him these days. He was classified as County Marquis Li's faction and was ostracized by the King of Shu's faction everywhere. Without County Marquis Li, he didn't even have anyone to talk to. He had to deal with chores all day long. These bastards always caused trouble. If he didn't handle it well, he would be caught again. This magistrate of the capital was so useless. He hurried into the restaurant and asked loudly, "Where is the person who beat up people?" "Sir, over there." The owner immediately pointed upstairs. "Who dares?" County Magistrate Liu strode up the stairs. He was about to raise his head in question when he suddenly stopped. His face lit up with joy. He quickly walked over and said in surprise, "Sir Li, when did you come back?" Although it was more appropriate to call Li County Marquis Li, he had gotten used to it when he was in Qing and Prefecture and had never changed it. "I just came back a few days ago." Li looked at County Magistrate Liu and said with a smile, "I haven't seen you for a long time." "County Magistrate Liu, you're still as elegant as ever." Seeing that the capital official who had hurried over was actually talking about the old days with that young man, countless people at the scene were immediately dumbfounded. Xing Zijin was slapped, but at this moment, there was no hatred in his heart, only fear. He knew why young Duke Qin didn't dare to return the slap after being slapped. He also knew why that person could even ignore the Wang family of Luochuan. It was because he and these people were no longer on the same level. He was the youngest marquis in the Jing kingdom, the dean of the academy, the teacher of the princes and princesses, the favorite of the emperor, and even had the power to mobilize the secret intelligence bureau. He was not a playboy, because the biggest playboy in the capital only relied on the blessings of his father's generation. When their father's generation saw him, they also had to give way to him. County Magistrate Liu suppressed the joy in his heart and looked behind him. He asked, "Sir Li, the matter here, the younger generation is insensible and needs the elders to teach and advise them. Otherwise, I'm afraid they will go astray in the future." Li waved his hand and said, "It's just a small matter. There's no need to trouble Sir Liu. Let their elders take them back and discipline them well." As soon as these words came out, everyone at the table, including Xing Zijin, changed their expressions. He meant that all the people present today, none of them could leave. If their elders came here to take them back, they would probably be turned upside down after they went back. At this moment, County Magistrate Liu had already understood some meaning from Li Yi's words. He was secretly delighted. This time, County Marquis Li was really angry. It was a good opportunity for him to frighten those who secretly played tricks. County Magistrate Liu waved his hand, and the yamen runners and constables behind him had surrounded the stairs. He smiled and stretched out his hand, saying, "Sir Li, please." Li looked back at the two women and said, "Don't stand here. Let's go down and eat." Under the gaze of all the people in the building, they went down the stairs. When passing by the shopkeeper, Li looked at him discontentedly and asked with a frown, "What's the matter?" "It's been so long, but not a single dish has been served." The shopkeeper shuddered all over and immediately said, "I'll go and urge them right away." Right away. After saying that, he ran to the kitchen. He had already made up his mind that if the chef couldn't cook those dishes in 15 minutes, no, in 15 minutes, he didn't need to come here tomorrow. Chapter 743. It turned out that it was necessary to urge the waiter when eating out. Soon after he urged the waiter began to serve the dishes one after another. "Come on, eat more fish to nourish your body. Eat more vegetables, too, so that the nutrition will be balanced. This dish tastes good. Try it." "County Magistrate Liu, have you eaten? Do you want to sit down and have some?" As a result, such a strange scene appeared in the restaurant. It was very quiet in the restaurant. The playboys were blocked upstairs, feeling nervous and panicked. The young man downstairs had already started to pick up food for the two girls from time to time, and did not forget to comment on them. This kind of strong contrast gave everyone quite a shock. Was he really so fearless? Although those playboys couldn't leave for the time being, their guards had been released, and they might have rushed back home to report this matter. Was that young man going to face the Qin family, the Wang family, the Xing family, and the Wei family alone, which was powerful enough to shake the capital. After such a thing happened, the diners on the first floor and the second floor were naturally not in the mood to eat anymore. Some people were worried that they would be affected by the matter, so they left in a hurry. Some people thought that the following scene might be even more exciting, and they wanted to stay and watch. Of course, from County Magistrate Lu's attitude and the young man's fearlessness in the face of such powerful people, many people had already guessed his identity. Yes, in the whole capital, who dared to disrespect Prime Minister Qin and the officials of King of Shu except County Marquis Li, who had been silent for a long time. After a long silence, when he reappeared in people's sight, it set off a monstrous wave again. In any case, there would be a big show today. Upstairs. Although one side of Qin Yu's face was swollen, he was quite calm, and he even sat down again, drinking and eating as if nothing had happened. However, his other hand, which was hidden in his sleeve, was clenched into a fist, with blue veins popping out, indicating that he was not as calm as he appeared to be. Xing Zijin covered one side of his face, and the fear in his heart was greater than anger. He came back, he finally came back. Li Jianren was dead, and after Chen Lisan was saved by the dung, he shut himself in his room and refused to see any guests. When Cui Shixin went out, he would always be accompanied by more than 10 guards. Obviously, he was scared out of his wits. All this had nothing to do with that person, because what he was best at was to kill others with a borrowed knife. Whenever he thought of being targeted by such a person, he would feel a chill in his heart. Thinking of this, he immediately looked at Wei Junliang with deep disgust. Wei Junliang walked over in a daze. He didn't dare to look at Qin Yu. He looked at the others and murmured, Who is he? Xing Zijin didn't answer, but the young man who spoke just now raised his eyebrows and said, No matter who he is, he's dead for sure this time. The Wang family will send someone over soon. I want to see how he'll explain to the Wang family then. Among the people present, many were descendants of rising officials, so they could not wait to get involved with the Qin family and the King of Shu. However, they did not expect that such a thing would happen with young Duke Qin around. Among the people present, many of them were descendants of new officials. Therefore, they couldn't wait to get involved with the Qin family and the King of Shu. However, they didn't expect that such a thing would happen with little Duke Qin around. Wei Junliang looked at the crowd and felt a little relieved. There were so many people, and there were so many families behind them. Who did he think he was? Even the Qin family would have to think twice before going against so many people at the same time. What's wrong? The food is not to your taste. Li Yi asked in surprise, looking at the two women who did not seem to be in high spirits. Xing Zumo glanced at him. She really could not find a second person who could still be in the mood to eat under such circumstances. She pointed upwards and asked, Is there really no problem over there? Li Yi looked up and waved his hand, saying, Don't worry, it's fine. He picked up another piece of tender fish and put it in her bowl, saying, Eat it quickly. It will get cold soon. Looking at the pile of fish in the bowl, and even the fish bones were picked out and put aside, Xing Zumo shook her head, but she was still worried. Wan Ruoqing did not speak again. Seeing that Li Yi did not care at all, she had already understood that he was not impulsive in this matter. As for the deeper reason, she did not care much. She only needed to know that as long as he was there, all the difficulties were not difficult. The sound of hurried footsteps coming from outside the door immediately affected the hearts of the people in the restaurant. A young man with a calm temperament walked in quickly. The first thing he saw was County Magistrate Lu sitting on the side. He frowned and asked, Lord Lu, what's going on? Before County Magistrate Lu could speak, someone had already shouted upstairs. The young man named Wang Yu leaned on the railing, waved his arms, and shouted, Big brother, I'm here. Wang Yong looked up and saw that the stairs had been surrounded by officials. He frowned again. County Magistrate Liu was worried about how to explain to the eldest son of the Wang family. On the other side, a faint voice came over. "Brother Wang, long time no see." Hearing that, Wang Yong was stunned at first, and then overjoyed. He turned his head and walked over quickly, asking, "Brotherly, you're back." Not to mention that the cooperation between the two families had brought great profits to the Wang family. The two families had advanced and retreated together. Even what his father said made him have to treat Li Yi specially. Originally, he heard that Wang Yu had caused trouble outside and was detained. For the sake of the Wang family's reputation, he came in person. He did not expect to meet Li Yi here, which was a pleasant surprise. Just by looking at Wang Yong's attitude, Li Yi knew that his family must have made a lot of money recently. Wang Yong simply moved a chair over and sat down next to Li Yi. He asked with a smile, "When did you come back?" Li Yi smiled and said, "Just a few days." From the moment Wang Yong stepped into the restaurant, he naturally became the focus of everyone's attention. The eldest son of the Wang family, the future head of the family, would eventually have to control that huge organization. His every move would be of great importance and would be watched by countless people. Originally, they thought that Wang Yong would definitely get back at the Wang family for being humiliated. In the capital or even the Jing kingdom, not to mention the royal family, there were only a handful of people of the same age who could be compared to him. However, his expression made everyone disappointed. Of course, there were more surprises. From the situation before them, it was obvious that the two of them knew each other. Furthermore, judging from Wang Yong's attitude, it could be said that he was extremely friendly. Even the fathers of those rich kids upstairs would not be able to make the future head of the Wang family humble himself like this. In an instant, the status of the young man in their hearts rose to another level. Wang Yu leaned on the railing and looked at the scene below with his mouth wide open. The strong contrast between his expectations and reality made it difficult for him to adapt. That was his eldest brother, his savior. How could he start a conversation with that guy? His eldest brother, Wang Yong, was different from him. He was the eldest brother of the younger generation of the Wang family and was also someone whom the family had high hopes for. From a young age, he had been groomed to be the next head of the family and had a lot of prestige among the younger generation. Now that the Wang family had been humiliated, shouldn't he be angrily getting back at them? Why did the scene before him happen? Wang Yu did not have too much time to be surprised. Downstairs, after clarifying the cause of the matter, Wang Yong's originally smiling face had already darkened. He stood up, looked up, and said coldly, "Get down here." Wang Yu's face revealed a look of horror. He grabbed the railing tightly because if he let go, he would directly collapse to the ground. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.